Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file 3A1.
Second.
I have a first from Commissioner Weiss, a second from Commissioner Flores. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Please see that that motion carries 7-0. On to the agenda. If you would like to begin, Mr. Von Laren.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Todd Von Laren, Chief Deputy County Administrator, and I want to thank Mike Jones from the County Attorney's Office for being with us, Alessandra Marchesani from our Legislative Affairs Office, and I want to thank Sherry and Lisa from OFMB for their work in putting this presentation together at the request of a number of board members. I did want to start by saying thank you to Representative Toby Oberdorf, the chair of the Select Committee on Property Taxes. For those who might not know him in our viewing audience, this is a unique opportunity and a real pleasure to have him join us in this conversation that we're going to have on property tax and property tax review, as he is overseeing that activity for the House of Representatives, and actually a piece of his legislation is one that we're going to be talking about. Chair Oberdorf, I appreciate the grace and the courtesy of which you provided me and others in testifying to you in Tallahassee before the Select Committee, and I promise that I'll return that same respect to you as well. So thank you for joining us. So we wanted to share with you first just some very quick, and some of these we'll move through very quickly, and some slides we'll spend a little bit of time on, but just for those in the audience, what are property taxes? So those are the assessed value of property times your millage rate. That's the amount that you get taxed on the value of your home, and so those are what we use to provide a lot of valuable services, including public safety, first responders, parks, special districts, and the like. So what is millage? A mill is $1 assessed for each $1,000 of taxable value. So a property that's valued at $250,000 pays $250 per mill, and that property value is set by the property appraiser. And then we also have different stipulations in law that govern certain exemptions to that. A Save Our Homes, for those that are homestead, is a 3% cap, or CPI, which is ever is less on the rise in your property values. And then the other exemptions that you see on this list. If you're a non-homesteaded property, then you are eligible for a 10% cap on increases from year to year in that rate. There's also an item called portability, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Chair Overdorf has a piece of legislation on this, but current law allows residents who are homesteaded, or to Save Our Homes allows residents to transfer tax benefits of up to $500,000 when they sell their property from the current assessed value of their home to the new market value of the new home that they're buying. And if they move into a lesser home, there's a percentage calculation that you do to use a like calculation to apply that Save Our Homes. So as we look at just an overview of Palm Beach County, on slide 7, you'll see a comparison of municipal and unincorporated residents. So about 882,000, or 56% of our residents, reside in one of our 39 municipalities. 43%, or 674,000 of our residents, are in the unincorporated area. We've got 1.6 million people total in Palm Beach County. For county government itself, we have 4 separate taxing districts. We have a countywide, a library, a Jupiter Fire Rescue, which will soon go away, and a countywide fire rescue. And you can see on those blocks each of the corresponding millage rates that apply to each of those 4 districts. Each of those has its own unique area, its own separate millage rate, and the funds that are allocated under those particular areas are specifically designated for use within those boxes and those boxes alone. So for example, County Fire Rescue, that 3.4581 mils can only go to service countywide fire rescue, and likewise the same with libraries. When looking at the taxable property values throughout the county, we have $342.9 billion in total value countywide of the 659,000 plus parcels that we have. And just a breakdown on the taxable side of that in the first chart, non-homestead is accounting for just over 61%, or $208 billion of taxable value. Homesteaded is 39% at $135 billion. Likewise, from a parcel comparison, you'll see that 44% are non-homesteaded parcels in our county, and 56% are homesteaded. So it's kind of an interesting flip in terms of the parcel comparison to the taxable value from non-homesteaded to homesteaded properties. This slide is very interesting. We spent a lot of time with the property appraiser on this and looking at the under 65 versus over 65, because in some of the proposals that you'll see, it talks about residents who are over 65 years of age. But from what we've been able to extrapolate, about 27% of our parcels, our taxable value, is on homes owned under 65, and 73% is over 65. And likewise, on the comparison of parcels, about 70% of parcels are owned by those over 65 years of age. We thought it was high, but we really dug into these numbers with the property appraiser a lot, and that's what we were able to work and provide. So I just provide that context to you, and we spent a lot of time on that particular slide. The next slide, we talk about the taxing district revenues. So this breaks down those taxing districts that I just shared with you, those 4, to see how we derive our revenue on a year-to-year basis, our $2.1 billion in property taxes. $1.54 billion, or 71% of our revenue, is from a county-wide levy that we use, and you have ultimate discretion on where those dollars go as the Board of County Commissioners. Just under $100 million, or 5%, is our libraries. Jupiter Fire Rescue is about $31.8 million, and then Fire Rescue is $481 million, with a small amount in debt service. So when you talk about other tax bills that we have in the county, this is just a list for your viewing of some other tax bill aspects and other entities in the county that have ad valorem levying capacity. Okay? So just wanted to share with you a little bit about our budget so that we can kind of familiarize that as we go through. So our total budget in Palm Beach County is $9.6 billion, and that number is large, but as you break it down, you see that really what we have to work with is a lot smaller than that number. Of that, almost half, $4.3 billion, is fund balance. And so $2.9 billion of that is capital. So almost $3 million of that $4.3 is capital projects from year to year that we are building, that are in process, and that have been encumbered. And that also includes some of our reserves in that area. But the one part of this pie chart that I really wanted to make note to you was the 22.6% that we've carved out, $2.167 billion. That is our current property tax levy, about 22.6% of all revenues that we derive. And you see licenses is about 6.6%, charges for service about 7.4%, intergovernmental revenues 7.6%. Thank you, Chair Oberdorf and the state legislature, and also our congressional colleagues for some of those dollars. We'll be asking you for more of that in this upcoming session, so we'd appreciate any consideration you would give to us for that. But just to kind of share and get a look of what those revenues are that we derive. When you go over to the next pie chart, and you look at where our expenditures are, almost an equal amount, 22%, just about $55 million less than we collect in current property taxes, is what we spend in public safety. So police, fire, emergency management, building, those are the areas that we consider under public safety. So when you sort of compare where our current property taxes are versus what we put in public safety, it's fairly similar and aligned in those collections to public safety. And that's important because when we get into some of the legislation that the Speaker and Chair Oberdorf are considering in Tallahassee, public safety, but specifically law enforcement, is carved out from those reductions. And so we'll dive into that a little bit as we get into these particular proposals. On page 15, this shows you our general fund expenses. So in the yellow, you can see that the sheriff is just under $1.1 billion that we allocate. Other constitutional officers and judicial is $114 million. So those two items alone are ones that we really can't touch under any piece of legislation. Neither the sheriff, constitutionals because we're required by state law to fund those, our debt service, which is relatively small in the scheme of things. So then when you kind of hit over to non-departmental revenues, most of that $83 million is CRAs. So we are required by state law to pay $83.9 million this year, just straight off the top to CRAs. So we obviously don't have a lot of discretion over that either. Reserves were about 15% of general fund expenses, and then you get into capital and BCC departments. So that $735 million between BCC departments and capital is really a lot of what the Board of County Commissioners has the ability to zone into during the budget process and make those determinations on how to spend and put those dollars. And that's going to be an important number when we look at these next proposals and getting into some of these reforms. Yes, ma'am.
Brief question for you. When you say what we allocate, this includes infrastructure as well?
This includes infrastructure that we have broken down on BCC departments and also in the sheriff's budget. And Sherry, do you want to expand on that?
Right. So a lot of our infrastructure is through our capital funding. And then the BCC departments include engineering, facilities, and
What
the other
makes that all
construction.
possible?
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
But again, the encumbered dollars that this board and previous boards have put together of about $3 billion, that is in that fund balance that carries forward from year to year on projects that are in motion and have already been approved by this board or previous boards unless otherwise changed by this board. So let's get into the discussion too, and we said we would kind of go bill by bill to just give you an overview of the property tax reform proposals in the House. The Speaker of the House on October 16th of 2025 sent a memo to all of his members that provided the 8 proposals that we're going to go over today from the House. One of the prohibitions was that it prohibited law enforcement funding from having a reduction if these were to pass, and the other important piece was it exempted school taxes. So the first bill that we wanted to discuss was on page 18, and this is HJR 201. This is proposed by Representative Steele, and this is the elimination of non-school homesteaded properties. So essentially, it eliminates property taxes for non-school homesteaded properties taxes. So when you look down at the county impact, and we try to break this down in the 3 larger funds that we have, general fund, libraries, and fire rescue. Our general fund impact is about $607 million if this were to become law. In libraries, $43.9 million, and in fire rescue, $208 million. If you look at the bullet just below that, the State Revenue Conference, and I wanted to make sure we put this comparison, the state has scored these proposals as well through their State Revenue Conference, and they estimated Palm Beach County would be about a $963 million impact. Now, they might use some different variables than we did working with the property appraiser on some of these, so I just wanted to point that out to you, but they'll be relatively similar as we break down some of these numbers.
Excuse me, Todd. Commissioner Woodward has a question.
Thank you. Just to clarify, as you're moving forward, when you say Palm Beach County, are you meaning us county or county with all the municipalities in the full impact?
Yeah, sure.
I think it means the full county with some cities in that number also from the revenue conference. That they,
Some cities, we don't know.
well, they have to do an average. I mean, with
Okay.
39, and the millage rates are so different from all of it. So they looked at like an aggregate millage of all those.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So just the importance of these
Me, Todd.
oh, sorry, Mayor.
Administrator Abruzzo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. But to be clear, Sherry and Todd, this slide shows that if that passed, the little over 600 million that we use to run our government, that really runs our government, 90% of it will be eliminated.
Right.
Correct.
So the county impact that we're showing here is both what the actual dollar amount and then a percentage to what that would be on the general fund, in the BCC departments and capital. So Sherry, if you just go back a few slides to 15, so we can kind of focus on that real quickly. So your turquoise and your light blue slides there between BCC departments and capital, those are the references with those 2 pieces of this pie that we are sharing in each of these slides on the impact. So you know what that impact would be as a percentage of that BCC department and capital, of which the board essentially has the most control in terms of reduction and spending in that space on any given budget from year to year. So about 90% of what we're showing here, if this were to become law, would be impacted in the general fund. And then fire rescue, on top of that, is another $208 million. I know that the issue of public safety has been discussed a lot in Tallahassee. So far, law enforcement is the only component that has been included for exemption in these pieces of legislation. Fire rescue is not included in there today. And because we have an MSTU that deals exclusively and specifically with fire rescue, it will impact that MSTU unless otherwise exempted by these pieces of legislation going forward. Okay? So,
Yeah, Commissioner Weiss. And then Commissioner Sacks.
So, thank you. Just to clarify, when you're saying, what you're saying is, it would have, you're going to reduce the general fund of BCC departments and capital by 90%.
that's correct. What the equivalent county impact would be on this legislation is equivalent to a 90% reduction of what we currently spend for BCC departments and capital.
So if I go back to that the other slide,
Page 15.
on page 15, then we're saying the BCC departments are $609,931. You're going to eliminate 90% of that, so that would leave.
You'll eliminate 90% of that and capital combined. So the 124 million and the 609 million, so basically the 734 million, $33 million that you have between those two pieces of the pie, that's the rough equivalent of what the impact that piece of legislation would have on the general fund.
So just 609 times.
And we share that just because, as I pointed out in this slide, sheriff, constitutional, debt service, non-departmental revenue, for the most part, are exempt under the legislation, under public safety, or under state law requirements to fund constitutional officers, CRAs, RTA, tri-rel funding, that's all included here. So most of these come with some prerequisite from the state.
Basically, you're going to run you would run the county on roughly $60 million.
You would run your general fund expenses based on that. And so when we go back, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but when we talked about revenues on the previous page, on page 14, when you look at both the pie chart that we have for revenues and expenses, and I want to point out, we raise $629 million in license and permits. We raise about $713 million in charges for services, and obviously all of those pieces create the broader budget. So, you know, I want to be careful that $2.167 million is property taxes. Those are those other fees that we charge to run county government. And so those are the kinds of areas that we as a board and the administrator, and we'll talk about this on the last slide, have also charged us at looking at all these revenues. And I will tell you that we're very limited in how we can raise these revenues and what types of sources there are to do that.
I mean, well, it's by law, isn't it a charge for the actual cost per the service? You can't exceed that?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, yes.
So, and those programs that you're providing the services to, those are not general. Those are people that are either getting permits, or they get their water from us, or
Yes.
They're paying a fee to animal care and control to license an animal or whatever.
And there's restrictions on those revenues that we receive. So you can't use a utility fee that somebody pays to fund animal care and control or the library system. It has to go to our utility. Likewise, your permit fees that you have through PZ&B have to be used for, you know, those specific sources within those individual departments. Okay?
Are you finished, Commissioner Weiss? Administrator, do you want to say something before Commissioner Sacks? Did you have a comment to add?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jumping ahead briefly, because we have the money in reserve. I just went through the process with Sherry and Todd of addressing all three credit agencies, so to keep up with our triple bond rating, Mr. Chairman, Madam Mayor. I was told by all three that we were right in the sweet spot, and they did not recommend dropping below where we are for reserves for a triple bond rating. Of course, if we went below that, it will cost even more money.
For somebody watching who doesn't understand what that rating provides us,
Sure.
would you please explain it?
I will. We have the highest credit rating for any county in the entire state. It's the highest you could be as a AAA bond rating. So every year, myself as administrator with our incredible staff, we have to address all three credit ratings individually to have them sign off that we maintain that rating. I just went through it. It's an all-day process and then some, and they said to me, you do not want to drop below where you are. If we drop below that AAA bond rating and went to AA plus or AA, it will cost even more money for us to build our project. So our budget would then even go higher. On top of the
Because
money,
of the interest rates?
because of the interest rates that we would,
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. But I also want to say, we are earning, our clerk's office is earning a very high rate of return. That would also impact, if we're pulling money out of reserves, the hundreds of millions that we get extra every year. So we do not want to tamper, in my strong opinion, with that reserve portion. That's what's keeping us in financial health. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Sacks?
So I'm glad I waited till Administrator Abruzzo told us that, because this would seriously affect our credit rating, which would then, we would have to raise taxes. Now, let me ask you something, Mr. Bonlaren. This is by Representative Steele, HJR 201. And we have the head of the legislative delegation sitting with us today. Thank you for that. What other property tax proposals are there right now? And I know there's many that are pending. We're just looking at one. And who is Representative Steele? From what part of the state is he or she from?
So, Madam Mayor, the presentation that we're going to go through today will point out every piece of legislation that's currently filed, and we'll do a quick analysis of most of those for you,
Excuse
both in
me,
the
Todd.
House and
The
the
question
Senate.
is, what part of the state is that representative from?
No, I understand.
I know
The
you
first,
did.
she asked me two questions. The first one was which property tax proposals are pending. We'll get to that.
Okay.
Secondly, Representative Steele is from the West Coast, West Central Coast of the state of Florida, in the Tampa, Hillsborough County area.
Okay.
That he resides in that region.
Okay.
So
And you go ahead. And so we're going to examine, because this is just one of many.
this is one. We're
In
going to
fact,
get to
I
those
think,
others, and yeah, we'll share the others with you.
Senator McBernard has one as well.
We're going to talk about
So
Senator
we're going to
Bernard's as
go
well.
over a little bit of all of these,
Yes, ma'am.
right?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
and then basically, and then at the end of this, if I could, Madam Mayor, at the end of this, will you, we lose our government, basically, the basic functions of county governments throughout the state, if passed, goes to the state. So we have to make sure that public is clear on that, because we won't have the money to do these functions that we've been doing for the last almost 100 years. But then the state will take them over. And part of these proposals, is that also there that the state has a department that they'll be running the entire governments of 67 counties, governments on these issues? Is that part of it as well, Todd?
Madam Mayor, I'm not aware of any department at the moment that is taking on that responsibility for us.
understand.
But Chair Overdorf might have an amendment to do that, so we'll lean on him a little bit later
to
on,
put
and he
him
can
on the
maybe
spot.
glean on some of that. But no, I don't
good.
think that is a proposal that's coming out
Very
of the
good.
legislature.
Okay. Thank you
Commissioner.
very much. Thanks,
Okay,
Madam Mayor.
no problem.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And Madam Mayor, if I just might, to Administrator Abruzzo's point on reserves, and one thing I will point out, that this board basically aligned itself with the Speaker of the House when it came to reserves. And Speaker Perez was very clear to the legislature this past session about where he wanted reserves to be in the state of Florida and where he charged the legislature to be over the next few years. And we mirrored that proposal under his leadership. So I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Speaker for his leadership on reserves and being judicious with the state's dollars, and this board for taking that lead and doing the same here, which means that those reserves are ever more important for us to safeguard and hold. And I think, we're going to continue to align ourselves with the Speaker of the House's proposal on those reserves, on keeping those as sacred as we
Do
can.
you remember what his take was?
His take was that he thought we needed to be about 25% reserves on the state level. And so he put the House in that direction this year and then the next fiscal year. And so we're right at that percentage, just under 25% that we've mirrored in reserves for the overall budget.
Thank you. Commissioner Woodward, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I look forward to the full presentation, and not to criticize the order, but because we're talking about, and when I looked at this before, I didn't quite understand until you mentioned it, the 24.7%, the 609 million is what you are saying is basically that chunk of the pie is what would be cut with this. And you have on slide 35, just for us to know, because it's at the end, but these are the departments that make up the $609 million.
Yes.
And these are the departments that would be directly affected by the cuts that are being proposed.
Yes, and so that last slide, when we get to it, that's sort of a little bit of a teaser for the board as we look at January with the budget workshop that the administrator is going to be holding with you. That's based on an exercise that the administrator has asked all of his departments right now to submit both 5, 10, 15, and 20% reductions in their current budget. And so I put it at the end because, one, we wanted to kind of prelude it to that, but two, when we talk about some of the impacts of the legislation and the exercise that the administrator is going through with his departments right now, it'll put that in perspective to you in those broader numbers. A 20% reduction to our BCC departments is about $110 million. And I can tell you, reviewing all of the reductions that they've proposed was a very difficult exercise for a lot of our department directors to get there. And that still is $500 million less than the first proposal that we're just talking about in
I
terms
guess
of
I'm just
impact.
bringing up that slide so that we know as we're moving forward, are each of these proposals, they're directly affecting just these departments? Is that correct? On anything that's being proposed by the House or the Senate, it's about these departments.
For the general fund piece,
the
because
general
then
fund.
there's the library that would be directly for
Yes.
the library and
Fire
fire
separate.
rescues, yes.
Okay, so, yeah, and I mean, I understand why you put it at the end, but I think, it's important for us as we're digesting what these cuts mean, that these are the departments we're talking about, which does include, a lot of quality of life, roads, engineering's a big one. I mean, and with this first cut, our engineering is $66 million. So we wouldn't even have enough to just run engineering if that's the only thing we did. Is that correct?
So, yeah, I mean, the cut for engineering is not quite that much. It is, and I can.
No, I'm saying if the homestead properties were to go
Oh,
away,
I'm
what
sorry.
we're left with
Yes.
would not even
If you're looking
cover
at
our
a
roads and bridges.
90% reduction, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty significant.
All right, so I look forward to the rest of these, but I think it's important, just for us as we're looking at this, that these are the departments that we have discretion, so to
Yes.
speak, on, and what these cuts will mean.
These are the approximate 36 departments that
Okay.
are funded by the board
Thank you.
and overseen by the administrator. Correct.
Thank you, Commissioner Woodward. Commissioner Flores?
Yeah, so Todd, you mentioned, and I think Commissioner Weiss also alluded to this, that basically the 10% that's remaining is about $60 million to be able to operate the county on. But when we look at that, what percentage is salaries that we pay our employees out of that 609 million?
Got it. Lisa might have that data that she can provide for you. Don't have it offhand.
I don't have that information offhand. I can have someone.
Would you say that's a large chunk of that?
It's got to be 75, 80%
75,
probably, would be
80%.
my guess, but we can get the exact.
And isn't that the same individuals that provide the services that then we provide the services like planning and zoning and, because when I look at the chart on slide 14, there's $629 million that are derived off of licenses and permits and other taxes. So the people that we have to pay to provide those services are no longer going to be, according to this, we're not going to be able to employ everyone. And then we have another sliver, which is $713 million, which is charges for services. So we are essentially, without employees, we can't provide these services to the at-large communities, which essentially also handicap us from being able to provide essential services that the community developers and so on need us to take care of.
Yes, Madam Mayor, to Commissioner Flores's point, you know, the departments that this board funds are primarily funded by ad valorem. A lion's share of it is ad valorem. There's a small amount that might be represented in some of these fees, but overall, it is primarily ad valorem funded. So when you think about under some of these proposals, what we sort of need to hold sacred and need to kind of put a lockbox around, and what, you know, we have the ability to work with under these proposals, it's pretty significant what we've got to keep harmless, and it is a very comparable number to some of these others that you're going to see in these proposals about what that particular impact may be. And then again, it comes back to that question of revenue. And the administrator as well charged all the departments to look at every possible piece of revenue that they have within their toolbox and to bring back proposals to maximize that revenue so that we can bring those options back to the Board of County Commissioners as well to make those determinations on where, if anywhere, that the board might be inclined to raise revenues in other spaces besides ad valorem. But again, some of those are fairly limited in what we have the capability to do.
So I think essentially the point that I'm trying to make is you're not only taking our ability to have ad valorem, but you're also taking away our ability to provide services in a timely fashion, that those also make revenue for us to be able to provide these essential services. So I just want to make that picture for everyone so that they understand that this is not just going to handicap certain things, it's also going to handicap us, our ability to provide services that everybody in the county needs.
That's correct. Some of these proposals make it very, very difficult to provide the services that this board has been providing.
Thank you, Commissioner Flores. This is just the first of 8, Todd, that we are going over.
And we'll move through the others pretty quickly, but I think this is like the one that has the greatest impact, and you'll see that gradually there'll be less impact, but still some that have pretty significant nature. So I think this conversation is great to have here just to understand that impact, but you'll just kind of see more of how those numbers fluctuate with some of the other proposals.
As we go through the following slides, it's going to, I guess, show us different impacts from the different bills.
Correct. That's correct.
Please proceed.
Okay, yes, ma'am. So if you go to page 19, this is a proposal by Representative Miller, and this one phases out non-school homesteaded property taxes over 10 years. What it does is it provides an additional $100,000 exemption each year and then reduced to zero after 10 years. So eventually it gets to the same thing that HJR 201 does, but just over a longer period of time. So this one, again, in our general fund, we look at that as roughly about a $485 million impact, roughly 72% of our BCC departments and capital, and then libraries and fire rescue correspond. And then the State Revenue Conference pegged it a little bit lower than what we did in terms of what they thought the State Revenue Conference impact was for the county. So that's HJR 203. HJR 205, and this is where we talked about that 65 and older and those parcels, because we get into a number of these parcels, and particularly the ones that Senator Bernard was working on that we'll share. This provides that all Florida residents that are 65 and older are exempt from paying their non-school homestead property taxes. Representative Porras provided this piece of legislation. The impact is about $441 million, or 65% of BCC departments and capital, and then consequently, property taxes as a percentage in libraries and fire rescue. You see 32 million and 145 million, respectively.
Excuse me, Todd.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Powell?
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Todd, the $434 million that you just mentioned, what does that compare to the exercise that all departments were requested to do in terms of reducing? The $434 million compared to what would have, if every department reduced by 20%? What does that
So,
look like?
so when you think about each of our BCC departments collectively is about $610 million. This is a $441 million general fund impact. So it's equitable when you combine our BCC departments and the capital line to about 65% of that overall. So again, I'll go back to the exercise we did. 20% reduction in our BCC departments is about $110 million. That's 20%. In these numbers and the impacts we're talking about here, you're talking about a 65% impact and to both BCC and capital departments. So again, very significant, not as much as the previous resolutions by the legislature, but incredibly significant in terms of our budgets and what we fund.
Thank you.
Are you finished, Commissioner Powell?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
I have a question. Have we broken this down at all into household savings, and some of these that do not completely eliminate them?
I didn't look at, but our average taxable value is about 250,000.
It's around there.
So, but if they're homesteaded, depending on
Median
which
is-
one, yeah.
is that, yeah.
But if you're over 65, you're eliminating your property taxes for county and cities, and things like that, so. But
Thank you. Administrator?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With your indulgence, each slide, I just want to make it clear, because it's not on there, what's left to run the government. So for instance, on this slide, around approximately $174 million will be left with this proposal to run the government.
Thank you. Please continue, Todd.
So as you turn to page 21, HJR 207, this would be a new homestead exemption for non-school property taxes equal to 25% of the assessed property value of a home. It'll apply to both current and first-time homeowners. This was proposed by Representative Abbott. And again, this is roughly similar to the House Joint Resolution that we just expressed before, at about $435 million general fund impact, and libraries and fire rescue corresponding numbers that you see on this particular slide. On slide 22, this is HJR 209. So this is one which was actually a pretty unique and creative way to look at savings for homestead property owners. But if a homesteaded property owner has property insurance, and in a way to hopefully deal with the property insurance and incentivize people to get property insurance, they would receive an extra $100,000 exemption on non-school property taxes. So just so you know, in terms of the assumptions of our numbers on this one, our assumptions, I think, may be a little bit different than the State Revenue Conference on that. We assumed that 100% of homes have insurance. And so we based our numbers on a presumption that 100% of property owners in our county have insurance. That might not be the case. But for just purpose of doing that, we wanted to lay that out. And the State Revenue Conference may have accounted for a different percentage when they were doing their impact on this one. So just wanted to share that with you.
And any property that has a mortgage on it has to have insurance.
Correct. Yes. If you have a mortgage, then you have to have insurance on your property. Okay? So going to page 23.
Todd, real quick, Madam Mayor, so on that slide, we would be left with $124 million to run BCC departments and capital.
Thank you, Administrator. Representative Oberdorf?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a breaking news update on that. Todd, it's actually $200,000 is actually the overall exemption on that, not $100,000.
Oh, that was the
amendment
amendment
that was filed previously. Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
the
you.
clarification. So $200,000. So that economic impact will be a little
Be
bit
double?
higher. It won't be necessarily double, but certainly it'll capture a lot more of our properties that we have
So
throughout the county.
290 potentially?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me,
Yes, ma'am.
Never mind. Please proceed.
Okay. On page 23, HJR 211, this is our Chair Overdorf's piece of legislation. And In terms of the economic impact, I'm happy to say one of the least impacts on our county government. So thank you, Chair. But again,
Thank you for that.
The portability issue, I think, originated here in Palm Beach County with State Representative Carl Domino and one of his priorities that we put forward. And there's been a lot of success that a lot of folks have utilized that to both upsize and downsize properties to realize some of those savings. So under this proposal by Chair Overdorf, this benefit would allow that cap, that $500,000 cap that we talked about early on, to eliminate that and allow for that benefit to be transferred in its entirety, even if the home is valued lesser than the new home is lesser than the old home. So roughly to the general fund, you can see it's a very small percentage. The State Revenue Conference pegged that number just under $5 million countywide, and we're looking at about $1 million impact right now of what that would be to our BCC departments. So.
Commissioner Sacks and then Commissioner Weiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since we have the owner of this 211 here with us, Chairman, can you tell, I think this is, I served with Carl Domino, and he was the author of homestead exemptions, Save Our Homes, all of that. Can you explain this a little bit to us? Because it seems like, according to what Mr. Von Laren said, it has the least financial impact to the county's operating budget. You're here, we're here. If with the mayor's permission, I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Please.
Yes, ma'am, I'm happy to explain it now or go through my presentation a little bit later as was expressed. So happy to do it at that time if that's okay with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. My question has to do with how do you sort of, when you're trying to model this, understand, because are you looking at just inter-county people moving here or intra-county? I'm curious how you sort of try to analyze that.
I'm not sure. I'd have to call the property appraiser's office and just find out what assumptions they made.
Okay.
Yeah, because they helped us with all of the projections, so.
I mean, I would be hopeful if we had something like this, that lots of people from around the state would want to move to Palm Beach County. So.
Yeah.
Commissioner Weiss, Representative Overdorf, I believe wanted to.
Yes, thank you. So according to your property appraiser, you actually have some data on that as well. On this particular, it's called the differential, is the item right now, and currently within Palm Beach County, according to the data that was provided from the property appraiser, there's roughly 5,475 homes that are a part of this, and that value is roughly $1.023 billion. Now, to project who is going to be moving here and who's going to be moving out, you need to be a lot smarter than I am in that, and have a crystal ball and play the lottery as well. So I don't know what that number would be, but I would say that is your current items according to your property appraiser.
Thank you. Commissioner Woodward.
Thank you, Mayor.
Excuse me, Vice Mayor Woodward.
I did have a question because the State Revenue Conference number is significantly different than our numbers. Is that because they're probably anticipating more inter-county numbers than we were?
They may have used, like I said, they might have used some different variables when looking at these numbers, and it could have included some of those assumptions based on, inter-counties, but yeah.
Well, I had this to go back at the very end, but I wanted to know if you could expand a little bit on how portability currently works.
Yeah.
For those that are watching, and even myself, because it's somewhat confusing.
Sure. So the way that portability works today is if you are moving into, let's say, a larger home at a higher value, you would take the assessed value of your home that you have today and the market value of the new home you purchased. And the difference between that would be the portability savings that you would have. And you would be able to port that number from your existing home to your new home and apply that as almost a homestead exemption on it, up to $500,000. So if you were in a $1 million home today and you move to a $1.5 million home, and the assessed value on your $1 million home was $500,000, you could port that $500,000 to your new home and have that $500,000 apply as essentially a homestead exemption on that property. If you're going in the converse and you're going from a home that is higher value to a home of lesser value, there's a formula that you apply to it. So you subtract, you calculate the amount by the previous home. So for example, you have a market value of $300,000 and the assessed value is $200,000. You're saving, your home benefit is $100,000. If you're moving to that house with that market value of $180,000, you would take a cap ratio. So I don't know if I'm making sense with this.
Just for easy figuring, stick
Yeah.
with the $1 million home. If
Okay.
you're the $1 million home and you moved up, that
Yeah.
made sense. If you're
Yeah.
in the $1 million home and you move down
Move
to a $500,000 home, what do you have?
So you would do a calculation based on the new home value divided by the market value, which gives you a percentage. So let's say that percentage is 0.5%. So you would apply that 50% of that new market value, and then that would apply to your new home in the savings. So it's just a formula that they use, and then it will drop that number down for you based on that savings allocation.
So
It's a
with,
little easier to explain when you're moving up than when you're moving down.
well, just because if this allows for, because it says can be transferred in its entirety, even if the new home is valued less than the old home. So with this proposal, since we have, I think, 70+% of our property owners are over the age of 65, for the most part, I would, not all, but most downsize.
Yeah.
So how would that then affect us if they can move the entirety from their larger home and they want to move to a smaller home? Would it just then go to where they're not paying property taxes, or how would that work?
On the new piece of legislation,
this.
I don't know, I would defer to Representative Oberdorf on that, and just to understand the nuances of that particular bill and in that scenario, how that
It's
might work
interesting.
out.
I just,
Yeah.
portability can be somewhat confusing, but since we're talking about potential downsizing, that's the part.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I think that, long and short of it is that the bill makes it a lot simpler, so that if you're going from wherever you're going, you can take that portability with you. To your question of if this would actually pass and come into play, then yes, it's possible that a person could go from a large home to a lesser valued home and pay no property taxes whatsoever. That is a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Powell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Representative Oberdorf, I had a question with regard to this piece of legislation. I know you'll get to it in your presentation. Of those who voted on it, when it passed 24 and 10 days, was it bipartisan, or did only one particular party vote in favor of this? And it still has to go to 2 more committees prior to it being put on the ballot. Is that correct?
Sir, yes. All items that were voted on during the committee were a partisan line. That was a decision by the folks in the other party that chose to oppose all bills associated with this. In fact, there was one bill that where I was really surprised that the party chose to do that. However, it was a non-bipartisan bills across the board. So you'll see the same or very consistent vote as you look at all of the bills. And yes, there are 2 more committees, and it's likely that we will hear all of these bills in December at the next 2 committees that are coming up, and it'll be ready for the floor as of January. That's one of the items I'm going to talk about in my speech, yes.
Okay.
Todd, we have no more lights. If you
I
would
was
please
doing some more
proceed.
math for Vice Mayor Woodward on the $1 million home, which I think I've got it now down. So if you want to, so based on that $1 million home, if you had a $1 million home with an assessed value of $500,000, you'd basically have a $500,000 portability that would be allowable. So let's say you moved to a home that was worth $500,000, right? Half of what your current home is. You would divide that new value by your market rate, so it would come up to about 0.5% of a Saver Homes ratio. So it would give you about $250,000 of that $500,000 to port to that new house when you were downsizing.
That's current.
That's current. Yeah,
Yeah, that's the current.
that's the current.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was trying to do the math in my head and I just needed to write it down.
I believe we're on slide 20.
24, ma'am. So HJR 213, this one, and this was a little more difficult for us to be able to dig into our numbers locally. The statewide revenue conference pegged it at about $109,000, but this is the 3% over 3 years homesteaded property versus the current 3% a year increase. So under Save Our Homes, you're capped at 3% or CPI. Under this piece of legislation, it would be an average, and it would be 3% over 3 years of homesteaded value. So it would reduce that amount that your homesteaded property could go up, and then 15% over 3 years for homesteaded properties, as opposed to the current 10% per year that's in place now for non-homesteaded properties. So that's what that piece of legislation is that's pending now. And then the last piece of legislation that the House of Representatives, of the 8 bills that they are reviewing, and this one deals with an increase in millage rates requiring a 2/3 vote at the board level, and then newly married couples being able to combine their Save Our Homes benefits if they live in 2 separate homes, but they both have a homesteaded residence and have a benefit, and they move in, they could combine those Save Our Homes benefits. So this one is sort of the least in terms of the economic impacts of the House bills, roughly about $73,000 that we've projected. The state revenue conference is about $1.6 million of what they've projected, again, just based on assumptions of how many married couples, who might get married, who has homesteads, and what millage rates might increase by that prospective vote going forward. So those wind up those, and then what we've done is we've provided a House summary on page 26 of the impacts of each of these pieces of legislation as we, the county, and work with property appraiser Dorothy Jackson, her team, in providing you the best numbers that we can based on the data from these bills of the impacts collectively of the 8 pieces of legislation. And I'm sure that Representative Oberdorf may address this issue. Right now, all 8 of these bills are moving forward. They passed out of committee last week on to State Affairs. We don't know whether or not the legislature will look to pass all of these pieces of legislation and move them all to the ballot, or see which ones kind of rise to the top in the discussions with the House and the Senate, but that's sort of all part of the legislative process that many of you are intimately familiar with, and we'll just have to kind of see how the movement of those go as we move forward. Real quickly on the Senate pieces, and we'll move fast through these, because these were a lot more difficult for our property appraiser to extrapolate some of the impacts of these, just because a lot of these have different nuances in them as well. So for example, on page 28, and these are all sponsored by our Senator Mac Bernard, this is for homesteaded residents 65 and older, exempt from property taxes, and then it puts stipulations. They've lived in their property for at least five years. Their yearly household income is less than $350,000, and then it deals with a couple of different components. This is substantially similar to HJR 205 that we went over on page 20. So under that impact, that max to the general fund was roughly $441 million. $32 million to libraries and about $145 million to fire rescue. But we were not able to really dig into the county impacts on a lot of these, and none of these have been scored by the state yet either. So we didn't want to put numbers out there without having some backstop verification. So we'll just kind of quickly walk through these and kind of share roughly what they're similar to. On page 29, SJR 274, 276, 2 different pieces of legislation, but both dealing with the same issue, one a joint resolution, one just a Senate bill. But this assessment increases after homesteading for 20 continuous years. So somebody's been in their home for 20 years, and then you homestead for at least 30 years. That qualifies for a 50% homestead exemptions, and then you can combine those with multiple properties of ownership. So it gets a little more complicated in trying to extrapolate that data to put sort of a number and a score on that. On page 30, SJR 278, 280, this is if a new homesteaded property was assessed under $500,000 before it changed ownership, the new assessment cannot exceed 150% of the previously assessed value. So that is another piece of legislation filed by Senator Bernard. Page 31, SJR 282, 284, Again, this deals with the assessed value of commercial property used by small businesses capped at 3% or CPI, whichever is lower. This is one I know that we've talked about briefly on the board and with Mayor Baxter, and what that impact might be if commercial properties had similar exemptions to what we had in homestead exemptions. And then finally, Senate Bill 286 on page 32. This is a new formula that assesses change and additions and improvements under $100,000 of value on a home. I know that's something that we've talked about a lot as well for those who are making different kinds of improvements for their home and being socked with relatively high tax increases based on a newer market value. And we've had a number of conversations with Senator Bernard about this piece of legislation as well. So those quickly take us through some of the Senate bills, and as we get into it and those come up and we have the opportunity to compare data with state data, we'll provide some more of those economic impacts to you. Finally, the last two slides that I wanted to share with you, and the moment that Vice Mayor has been waiting for on looking at our individual departments and those impacts. So on page 34, I just take your eyes back to this slide on page 15 to just once again share our general fund expenses, our sheriff, constitutionals, debt service, and non-departmental, which we primarily have to hold, our reserves, which we've aligned ourselves very closely with the state and how we've allocated reserves. And then our capital and BCC departments being that $733 million number that we feel that will be the most impacted by any of these changes. And so the exercise on page 35 that the Vice Mayor alluded to earlier on is your BCC ad valorem funded departments and agencies, their expenses, their revenues, and their net ad valorem. So really quickly on that, the expenses are that $609 million. That revenue point, Commissioner Flores, that we talked about of that offset of ad valorem brings it to roughly about $554 million of net ad valorem that we spend on those departments. So some revenue that we have there, but still substantially in the ad valorem category. And then the cut scenarios that the administrator, and with some direction from the Board of County Commissioners, has asked our departments to go in is providing a 5, 10, 15, and 20% cut scenario. And that and if your eyes go to the last column at 20%, that's the $110 million number that I allude to of what a 20% reduction in across the board in your BCC departments and agencies is, and then compare that number to some of the numbers that we've been talking about in the proposals that we have out there today. So that is our presentation on property tax proposals pending before the legislature, and just a brief precursor into some of the exercises that we'll be discussing in greater detail with the board as we go through our budget process and monitor the progress of legislation in Tallahassee. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Powell?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Todd, or maybe Representative Oberdorf can help with this. In terms of place setting, right, you talked about the House bills, which you've all listed. They still have a couple more committees to go through. And then you talked about the Senate bills, which the Senate has the 3 bills that you indicated that were filed that still have been assigned to committee but have not been heard by committee. I want to know, with the House bills, if the Senate doesn't come up with proposals that match, does the House have the opportunity, what are the options, maybe Representative Oberdorf, that the House passes their bills off the floor and still has the opportunity to push them to the Senate without, do they still have to go to a committee and pass, or can they go directly to the floor? Would they have to have a special committee to go to the House, a special Senate committee first before going to the floor? Or could they take those House bills or those House joint resolutions, send them directly to the Senate and be voted on the floor to still go to the ballot and still have to be voted on by 60% or more? Also, with the Senate bills, in the same order, if the Senate were to pass legislation, would it still have to go to the House? Or would the Senate's legislation be able to be sent directly to the House and pass off the floor to be put onto the ballot. I don't know the rules of the Senate this year or the House, so it would be helpful for place setting for those who are watching at home to kind of let us know where we would be in the process, still understanding that we're still in process. This is nothing's final. These still have to go through certain committees, and there still is a possibility, like Representative Oberdorf said, there's been a change to one of the pieces of legislation going from $100,000 to $200,000 in homestead. There could obviously be additional future amendments and what that looks like. So kind of, we see where we're at in the preliminary proposals, but you talked about a crystal ball, where we could possibly end up. What do you see happening? Todd, then.
Madam Mayor, I can start, and I think that is a great question, Senator, and I've, over the course of my career, been an expert on the rules in both the House and the Senate, and particularly, as you look at the process of making sausage in Tallahassee. And, one thing that we do know is that the identical piece of legislation needs to pass both the House and Senate for it ultimately to be put on the ballot. Leadership in both bodies has a bit of flexibility within their rules to take those pieces of legislation respectively. So let's just assume that all 8 pieces of legislation from the House pass off the floor of the House and come over to the Senate. They'll be received in messages over the Senate. The presiding officers of the Senate will have the opportunity that, depending on timing, oftentimes on whether they want to refer those to committees in the Senate, which sometimes they often do, or depending on procedure and votes, whether or not they want to bring some of those items directly to the floor for consideration by the full Senate. I will tell you that in conversations that we've had and Alessandra's had with a lot of senators, that the Senate is taking a very deliberate approach to this. They're reviewing this. I know they've had conversations with the governor's office as well, and trying to figure out where they might land on some of these proposals. I think Representative Overdorf would share the same with you as well in terms of their conversations that they've been having. And so we are a long way away from the end of this process. So within committee weeks and session beginning, there's lots of options that are available for them, but ultimately they have to pass both the joint resolutions, the House and the Senate, and they would go directly to the ballot. The governor wouldn't have to sign those resolutions. The legislature has the ability to put those directly on the ballot, and they could be individually, or the legislature has different powers under the Constitution in terms of amending the Constitution. They don't have to have single subject rules. So most of these apply sort of a single subject to different areas. It's possible that some of these items could be combined in various natures. So through the amendment process that you talked about and Representative Overdorf alluded to that happened last week, some of these could be amended to include different components of what you see.
Commissioner Flores, or excuse me, Commissioner Powell, are you finished?
Unless Rep. Oberdorf wanted to add anything in particular with regard to that, but that's good information that you gave us.
Please.
Well, Mayor, with your indulgence, I'd like to kind of I have some prepared remarks, and then I'll be open to any and all questions whatsoever that I think it can have a little better dialogue than going from there, and happy to have an open dialogue, any questions on the table from up here, and happy to have those conversations. So if I could just run through some prepared remarks, and then we'll go from there, if you're okay with that.
The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So during 2025, the spring of 2025, Speaker Perez formed our committee with the express intent of addressing the rising cost of ad valorem taxes within our state. The members are made up of, now a 36-member panel. Of that, there are 26 Republicans and 10 Democrats on the panel from literally all over the state. And he charged that group with investigating how property taxes are assessed, how they're collected, and how the committee can formulate a plan to permanently put money back in the pockets of Floridians. My now former co-chair, Representative Lopez, who's now a commissioner in Miami-Dade, she and I met with groups and individuals literally from Key West to Pensacola, and everywhere in between. This committee embraced the work and met with city and county managers, elected officials, hundreds of local constituents, business groups, community organizations, and a multitude of chambers of commerce. Our committee had presentations from the League of Cities, Association of Counties, Department of Revenue, EDR, the Executive Office of the Governor, and personally, my office sent 111 letters to my region's elected officials requesting feedback on property taxes and received responses from county commissioners, county managers, city officials, city managers, town council members, and town managers. And thank you to the members that also responded on the committee here. I appreciate that. My office's efforts were replicated as literally hundreds of meetings, phone calls, and gatherings were conducted by the members of our committee throughout the state, as well as with our leadership team. The comprehensive data the committee analyzed included required local effort funding levels, property value assessment methodology, ag exemptions, budget forecasting, revenue collection, fire districts, special districts, debt financing, municipal utility rates and sweeps, fiscally constrained counties, ratio of ad valorem versus other revenue, ratio of homestead versus non-homestead, current Save Our Homes exemptions, DOJ reporting, millage rates, restricted versus unrestricted funds, school taxes, and public safety budgets, among many more data points. This committee worked with staff in the Speaker's office to assimilate the 7 House joint resolutions and the 1 House bill that were heard recently. As property taxes are part of the Florida Constitution, the only way to fundamentally change the system is to pass a constitutional amendment. For the members of the public and the folks up here today, the House Joint Resolution is a legislative branch's mechanism to propose a constitutional amendment. A House Joint Resolution requires a supermajority vote on the floor of both the House and the Senate. And once passed, it'll go to the Supreme Court to then review the language. Once on the ballot, Floridians will choose to vote for or against the constitutional amendments. And to pass a constitutional amendment requires at least 60% in the affirmative. Once passed, the legislature will formulate the implementing language prior to the proposed January 1, 2027 enacting date. On October 16th of this year, the Speaker released a memorandum addressing property taxes and the filing of the bills that were recently heard. In that memo, the Speaker acknowledged the ongoing dialogue around property taxes and the House's creation of the Select Committee to push the issue forward. The 7 House joint resolutions and 1 House general bill are based on the work of the Select Committee and were filed in furtherance of the House's efforts to address property tax issues this session. Importantly, the 7 House joint resolutions all propose constitutional amendments that would provide the voters of the state the opportunity to choose some, all, or none of the proposals in the 2026 general election. It's true that most of these proposals will have significant impacts on local governments. If some of them, or all of them, pass, local government will be required to make adjustments in the way they operate. What these adjustments look like will vary from city to city and county to county, but we should not be afraid to let the voters of this state, the same voters who elected each and every one of us, to make that decision for themselves, for their communities, and for this state. That said, at the outset, I just wanted to address some of the commonalities that exist between the proposals and touch on some of the questions that I'm sure you may have. Each of the proposed joint resolutions have 2 distinct components, in addition to their individual policy languages. First, they have language that specifically prohibits any city or county from reducing funding for law enforcement below their current funding level, and that's law enforcement only currently. Second, they exempt school taxes. Property taxes comprise, and this is a statewide number, property taxes comprise 46% of school funding, or about $21 billion, and those proposed joint resolutions are crafted so they will not impact our school. In addition, the joint resolutions do not have accompanying implementing legislation. Decisions should be made by the legislature once they know which proposals have been approved by the voters and can devise an appropriate statutory framework that accounts for how the various provisions might work together. On that note, I want to emphasize this point. None of the proposals directly conflicts with another. There may be some overlap between some of the proposals, but there is not conflict. The legislature will be able to harmonize the various proposals through implementing statutory changes. Again, whether one passes, they all pass, and I guess if none of them pass, then we won't be doing that. For this specific body, I just wanted to point out a couple of different items in your history. One of which is that the taxable value history within Palm Beach County. Currently, in 2021, it was roughly $210 billion was the taxable value. And again, these numbers are from your property appraiser. Roughly $210.3 billion. That has increased to 2026 levels now at $343 billion. That is an increase of $133 billion in 5 years is your taxable history, taxable value history. That's not what you are collecting. On the ad valorem tax history, this is what is being billed. It was roughly $1.005 billion in 2021 and has increased to $1.543 billion in 2026. This is an increase of roughly $500 million in what is being slated as revenue. And of course, the current property taxes as a whole make up about 7.7%, make up about 22.6% of your overall budget. And we saw an increase just this year in collection, proposed collection of 7.7% for your revenue, again, going up from $2.012 billion to $2.167 billion. So an increase of $155 million in proposed revenue coming in from property taxes. So members of this illustrious body, we are seeing that statewide revenue has increased just over the last 3 years of $18 billion. We're now seeing that property tax revenue statewide, again, and I'm looking over and over again statewide, that property tax revenue is approaching $60 billion just in property tax. And what we're seeing also is that property tax accounts roughly for about 34 to 35% in a general sense of an overall budget for the various municipalities. Again, we have 411 municipalities, 67 counties across the entire state. And when I did a poll of our members in our committee, we found that of those members, we found that there were only 3 over the last 5 years, 3 municipalities that actually had seen a lower amount of money coming in. And everywhere across the state of Florida, we're seeing an increase of property tax revenue coming in. And we feel that this is not sustainable. This is the reason that we are here and having conversations about property taxes. I am not the sole person that is going to be passing property taxes, of course. That is going to be the voters. I am not the sole person that's going to be putting this on the ballot. That will also come down to our members. That being said, I am here to answer questions, to allow you to become a little bit more familiar with what we're proposing. And I will say to you again, anything that you'd like to ask, I'm happy to try to present an answer and or get you more information on that. With that, Madam Mayor, you've gone through the bills, and so I'm happy to be here and be a resource. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Vice Mayor Woodward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to work backwards from your comments because I was making some notes. Just on the last numbers that you gave us on the new revenues that are coming in for the county and statewide, is that accounting for new construction or is that just an increase in existing properties?
That's an increase. I'm used to being recognized by the chair. I'm sorry. It's a house rule.
Sorry.
That is just in overall ad valorem collection. That is not recognized new construction.
Okay. Do we happen to know how much of ours is new construction brought online in that same? I know that's putting you on the spot here, but I'm just going off the numbers he was giving.
In 2021, 207 was existing, 207 billion was existing, 3 billion was new construction. 2026, 337 billion was existing and 5.5 billion was new construction.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm just trying to, because those are alarming numbers, but I do want to make sure that we're not necessarily all of that's an increase in existing. It is new because we have had a boom here, cranes everywhere with new construction that's coming online. So thank you for that. I just wanted to clarify. And in the simplest way possible, because I do get these questions from the public generally, layman's terms, how does this, what's being proposed, what's the process for people watching on what will end up on the ballot next November?
Great question. And so we have 2 more committee hearings for the House side. Those two committees are likely to be heard in December. We'll have one in the first week in December, one in the second, is what I'm being told that we're going to be moving forward, and then they will be ready for the House floor in the first week of January, the first session week in January. That being said, they have to pass by 60%, any House joint resolution. I would expect that we would likely see something combined. I don't expect to see 7 House joint resolutions on the ballot next fall. I'm not sure exactly what those are going to be, but that's the process that we're working through. And the Senate would then also be required to hear at least one of these within a committee, and then it would move forward to the floor over there as well. So even if we pass it off of the House floor and we get our required supermajority vote there, the Senate is required to hear it in at least one committee and then put it on the Senate floor over there, and it must pass by a supermajority in the Senate as well. If it does pass both of the legislative bodies, the language that is proposed for the ballot has to go to the Supreme Court for review. At that point in time, once they approve that language, it then goes to the ballot for approval. And as was stated before, we do not need the governor's approval at all to get any of these on the ballot. We do, of course, for any House bill. There's one House bill that just deals generally with some of the items on here, but the joint resolutions, we do not need the governor's signature.
So at the latest, what's like the absolute latest date that we and all of the voters will know what is going to be on the ballot, like what time next year?
I would suggest that it would be the end of session. Now, we had the longest session in the history of the Florida House last year, so I'd love to prognosticate and say it's going to be on the very day that the hanky drops, which is projected for March. At this point in time, I'm not exactly sure when session will end, but that being said, by the time session ends, you will know exactly. And as long as session's open, things can change in Tallahassee.
So shooting for March, but it could be later.
It could be later, yes, ma'am. Also, there was an item that was stated by the governor that if he did not think that the House or the Senate had done enough on property taxes, that he potentially would call for a special session, that we might have to go up there. And I want you also to be aware that there are requirements for what can go on the ballot, the timing associated with that. We have to get ballots out to our overseas partners and the folks that in the military. So those ballots have to be done fairly quickly. And so we will not have extended sessions into July or August. I would suggest that we should know, hopefully, by the end of session.
Okay. And then also, just because people in the public have been asking, can the governor, as a procedure, put something on the ballot without the House or the Senate participating?
The governor could put something on the ballot if he chose to go through the public process, which would mean he would need to get a ton of signatures and have those signatures in every single county. He'd also be required as a private citizen to work through that process. He would also need the Supreme Court to sign off on it. I would suggest that it's probably pretty late in the election process for that to happen. So my feeling is that the only way that something like this would get on the ballot would be through a House joint resolution.
Okay, thank you for that, just because I have fielded some questions from the general public asking how all of this is going to take place. So thank you for explaining that. And then with your indulgence, Mayor, just a couple, it seems pretty clear that there is going to be something regarding property taxes on the ballot. And if it gets on there and it were to pass, to be clear, that would start in the January 27 tax billing. So for our budgeting purposes, if this passes in November and the voters agree, what are we looking at as far as when are we fiscally impacted by this?
Excuse me, Commissioner, or excuse me, Vice Mayor. Administrator, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Mayor. Chairman, thank you so much for being here. Obviously, I'm charged with running the operations of our government. I heard what you said in regards to the budget going up via property taxes, and I understand that. One of my greatest challenges that I see early, I've only been on the job for a little over 3 months, is the cost of doing business, what it cost 5 years ago and what it costs today. We recently had to bond a project out, a building, and some of our infrastructure is in great need. That went up almost 3.5 to 4 times what it cost on the construction side just from 5 years ago. Getting shovel and dirt for our roads, our engineering department, again, skyrocketing costs. So when you discuss those numbers, it would be great to get an analysis of, yes, these are the increases, but what is the cost of doing business, actual doing business? For our frontline workers, we're competing with fast food restaurants having higher wages. Wages have explode nationally. We have to compete with the private sector. So when I look at our 7,100 position and what it costs, and this is something that's pretty much out of our control unless we decimate the workforce. If we lower wages, don't compete with the private sector, we will lose the ability overall to do business. And I know that sounds doomsday, but that is reality of what I look at as an administrator. So again, the cost of business. And I would love to hear your opinion based on the numbers provided by staff, that $609 to $610 million range, if you believe that or have any pushback that that is what our board can control. That since you exempted our, and I understand why, and believe me, our sheriff's department at the $1.1 billion in the budget that we cannot touch, and quite frankly, that's not my purview. But if you have any debate about that number, that yes, this is the 610 million, this is what the board controls, cost of business has skyrocketed in those 5 years. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I'll try to answer both questions, actually. First of all, Vice Mayor, as far as when you're looking at the implementation, yes, January 1, that's when all property taxes are reviewed every year, of course, is January 1. And so we would then have implementation language that would be put into place directly after the election of November. The new members of the House and Senate would do implementation language. That would likely need to be signed off on by the governor at that time, and move forward with that implementation language that would then take place January 1. So you will then have an entire year to lay out your budgets, to figure what you were going to be doing for that next year, how you were going to be doing those budgets, and that would then you would be sending out those tax bills in the appropriate time the following fall. So you will have some time to plan associated with that. Administrator Abruzzo, I don't envy your job. And I do understand the implications that you're looking at. I have a job as well, and that job that has been slated to me is to find ways that can put money back in the pockets of Floridians. And I do not wish to go through and decimate local government. We also have to look at this in a statewide process. And that statewide process is telling us that there is revenue that has been outpacing inflation, has been outpacing the cost of jobs. I also run a company, and I've seen the costs go up with the projects that we're overseeing. I understand exactly what you're saying. Whatever we end up with in the formulation of one or all of these proposals, that will ultimately come down to the voters. And the voters will need to decide if, in fact, they prefer this proposal over that proposal. We had a homestead exemption proposal just a couple of years ago that failed, and that was covering teachers and firefighters and policemen and giving them an additional exemption. That failed, did not reach the 60% threshold. So while we may have something that is proposed and on the ballot, I'm not sure if it'll pass or not, because again, that is such a tough item. But I do know that people talking to me, and including elected officials, have said, I'd love to have more money back in my pocket. And then the elected official will come on and at the same time, on the other side, will say, but I'm worried about what we're going to be doing in the future and how I'm going to serve my constituents. So I hear what you're saying. I acknowledge that. Again, I don't envy your job, but that being said, I think that there are probably some items and some ways that you would be able to come back from any type of a constitutional amendment that would happen here. And these items and arguments and fears are the same items and arguments and fears that we saw with the Save Our Homes legislation that came forward. We didn't think local government would exist after that, yet we've done pretty well since that time. So I would suggest that there are some opportunities where we can tighten our belts. Some of these things are going to hurt, but I would suggest also that we have a long way to go before these items are actually on the ballot and/or approved by voters. Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Administrator.
Thank you, or Mr. Chairman, in our world follow-up. Mr. Chairman, one number, you brought up the inflation number, and I agree with you, but you have that overall inflation number, that's the national overall goods and services. I think the number we need to look at is the actual construction number. What is that number? What is the actual wage piece number? And you have to get in granular in it from frontline workers to management. You have to, in my strong opinion, Mr. Chairman, you can't go by the overall inflation number because that's a universal number that reaches across every sector of our economy. But when you look at, you have to, again, in my strong opinion as our former CFO, you have to look at government construction. What is the overall government construction nationally or in the state of Florida gone up? I recall when Commissioner Sachs and I started in the legislature in the House in 2008. Our budget that year was $66.5 billion. It's now close to $115 billion. So costs have been going up, but the costs for the state also have been going up in many sectors as well, Mr. Chairman. And thank you so much for acknowledging the challenges behind this, because it will be extremely challenging. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Flores.
First of all, Representative Overdorf, I want to say thank you for being here, being with us, taking the time to address us and to provide your input, and also for your leadership on the property taxes, being the chair of that. You're up north, you're a neighbor. I see here that you went to Florida Atlantic University, so you're very familiar with Palm Beach County. So with that being said, Palm Beach County is a destination community. A lot of people come here because of the type of quality of living that we afford the individuals here. I think we're also known for being one of the maybe richest counties, which is far from the truth. Palm Beach Island might be wealthy. The majority of our residents in our community are not. We struggle on a day-to-day basis. We have a lot of poverty. We have a lot of homelessness. These are a lot of social issues that we're constantly trying to make sure that we improve the quality of living for everyone in Palm Beach County. We have infrastructure issues. Right now, we're trying to figure out how do we move people in this county. We talked about how there was a rise in our taxes. That was around the same time of COVID. When COVID occurred, there was a phenomenon here in Palm Beach County. Everybody wanted to move to Palm Beach County. A lot of people sold their homes and they left. And we got a lot of people from New York, Boston, all the Northeast part, which made our taxes go up. People sold, they no longer had the cap, whatever it was. But what we also saw is what our administrator alluded to is the rise in cost. Whether it's construction, labor, everything has gone up. And it affects everyone. It affects my residents. By the way, I am the District 3 Commissioner. I feel that I represent the workforce in this county. Your everyday mom and pop that get up early in the morning and go to work. And everybody's feeling it. I've had several conversations about this, but a lot of people are also afraid what is going to happen to our quality of life? What is going to happen to our security? What's going to happen to our firefighters? What's going to happen to our police officers? Now, there's an exception that's being presented. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that are going to be affected by these decisions that might be moving forward. You mentioned that perhaps it's one, perhaps it's two, perhaps some of these get combined. So what we're really looking at, we don't really know what the impact may be if there's 2 or 3 that are rolled or accounted together. I understand that there has been an increase in taxes. I used to be the mayor of the city of Green Acres. A city like that would be crippled by what some of these things will happen. Green Acres, and by the way, my district primarily is a residential community. We really have very little industry. So communities like this would be crippled. I have no idea how they would afford to do anything. We pay for, Green Acres pays for their police services, PBSO, through their ad valorem. They would no longer have that. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's a lot of people that are concerned. I'm concerned about our staff. Reducing our labor force, not only just in Palm Beach County. We're talking about perhaps even firefighters, municipalities, constitutional offices. We are one of the largest employers. I think this would send ripple effect to not just Palm Beach County, across the state. How many people are going to be unemployed because of reducing property taxes? I understand that there's some jobs out there, but there's not enough to cover everything, that all the people that would be fired or let go of. So I want you guys to, when you guys are doing this, and by the way, your bill is one of the most reasonable bills, and Doge came here, and they looked, and they really haven't found much. There's certain things that they have said, hey, we got to address these things, and we're working on it. But we're not wasting people's money. We are working hand in hand with our people to make sure that we do the right thing. But we did studies for our labor force, and we're underpaying a lot of these folks. We can't hire some of the engineers and the planning and zoning because we're not paying nearly enough what they should be paid. So I'm bringing a lot of things to your attention. I know that you're very familiar with some of these. I'm pretty sure you've heard it many times over and over. But I guess what I'm doing here publicly is pleading to you, your leadership, and your fellow representatives and senators to, when you make a decision, make sure that it's fair for everybody so that we're still able to provide the safety, the services and safety that our public deserves. So once again, thank you so much.
Commissioner Flores, you're very welcome. And that's our challenge too, is looking at we have to look at the macro and then realize the implications of the microeconomics associated with that. Although it's hard for me to say that Palm Beach County is a microeconomic, that is the reality when we're looking statewide. We have to really be looking also at that side of it. You mentioned also the everyday mom and pop, and so I think that's something we are taking into account, is that everyday mom and pop, from putting some money back into their pocket as well, and seeing what a potential exemption or a potential modification would be for them as well, to have that money closer to them rather than to have to, as some folks have said, pay rent on their home that they might own. We have not received any proposals from the governor as of yet whatsoever, or from the Senate as of yet. And we in the House have taken a hard stand on law enforcement and a hard stand also on school taxes as well. And those things are things that would certainly affect. And I will say it to your chief and to others in fire, is that please be a part of this process, show up when we're having these hearings, and talk to the members of the committee. I think that is another area. You are correct in that we are not necessarily looking at all of the costs associated with this. The constitutional approval of the minimum wage certainly went through, and so we're all seeing that as well as an overall cost. And I agree with you on that. We also see that your budget has gone up by 6.1% just this year. And when you're talking, that's an increase of roughly $550 million, which, oh, by the way, is the same number that we keep going back to as far as your services. So I would suggest, last year, what were you looking at for how we're going to fund those services when you've gone up by $550 million? Now, this is just a discussion.
Yeah.
That was the sheriff.
This is a discussion. I understand that. I'm not attacking. I'm just saying there are some opportunities potentially that we could have there. I'm just going off of the numbers associated with the revenues that's on the property appraiser. It's all I'm going off of. I don't have a staff that is telling me all of this. So I think there may be some opportunities. I don't know, again, what's going to pass or not pass, but I have a feeling I'll be back here having a discussion.
Thank you, Representative Oberdorf. I have a few lights on, but I believe Vice Mayor Woodward wanted to respond to something you had said briefly.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify the number that you just gave with the increase. How much of that was the sheriff, which any of these bills we are now prohibited from touching?
So, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, roughly that increase accounted for about $360 million of that to the sheriff and law enforcement. And, we've had also some extraordinary circumstances in Palm Beach County that have necessitated the need for increased law enforcement due to a number of factors, both in our control and outside of our control with the federal government and partnering with them on a number of pieces there.
And
So,
please, if you would share how much we spend daily on protecting the president.
To date, we've spent about $60 million or so since pre-inauguration for security related to the sheriff. In the past, we've received some of those reimbursements from the federal government, not all. We're scheduled to receive some of those, but to date, we haven't gotten the flow of those dollars yet. So we're essentially footing the bill for the Secret Service as a county to protect the president when he's here, and it's necessitated, a lot of resources on the law enforcement side. But just this year alone, our sheriff's budget, our board appropriated more money for the sheriff than what we received in new ad valorem dollars coming in. So that budget accounted for all of the new revenue that we received in ad valorem, plus a portion of state tax revenue share and other revenues to do that, just to put that into perspective.
Thank you, Todd. And Commissioner Weiss, I apologize, but please, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mayor. Chair Overdorf, again, thank you so much for being with us today. I mean, I think we all really appreciate it and having the opportunity to speak directly to you. Thank you. Couple things. Earlier, Administrator Bruzzo had postulated in a question to you in regards to the $609 million that ultimately this board has real control over. Do you dispute that that's an accurate number?
I would say that this is a future number that if in fact the House Joint Resolution 201 passes, that is the only time that full number would come into play, as if in fact there is a removal of all homestead property taxes.
But you don't disagree that it's not that it's an inaccurate number?
I have no basis to disagree. I'm not an expert in Palm Beach County finances like the administrator.
Okay, all right. Just to go back, earlier in our discussions, I don't think we really talked about this. How do these proposals impact our special taxing districts?
So it depends on the special taxing district. If the taxing district is taxing by unit and has a set fee per unit, that would not affect them. If that special taxing district is in fact assessing by the ad valorem side of it and the property value side of it, it would in fact affect them. So that is the agreement you have to look at in all the special districts. That is, frankly, one of the reasons that fire was not included originally in some of the conversations that we've had, because statewide, fire does have some fire districts. They do have some other ways that they actually have funding associated with them. So that was one of the reasons that we had not included fire districts or fire overall in some of our proposals. But again, special districts are taxed in a variety of different ways, and that's why we did not have them included, and we don't feel that there's going to be an across-the-board impact, and the analysis is going to be extremely difficult to look at for special districts.
So just to help for the folks that are watching this at home, what you're saying then is if there was a fee levied on a per parcel basis, so if, let's say, for example, the libraries had a flat fee of, I don't know, $100 per home per year, that would not be impacted, but if they have a millage levy, that would be impacted.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so, thank you for that. And I think you already went over sort of the implementing timeframe, so this would take effect, because we collect taxes in arrears based on the previous year's valuations. So this would ultimately impact, going forward, be the 28-29 actual fiscal year for local governments. Is that accurate?
The budget, the items would be collected based on whatever, on January 1 of 2027 is the valuation, and then you'd be forming your budget for the following year. You are correct.
I think it's the 27-28 budget, the budget that starts October 1 of 27 through September 30th of 28. Because the property taxes on January 1 of 2027 funds the fiscal year 28 budget.
Okay. I think, one of the challenges this is really just a discussion point for me, is really, as we're in understanding, that people are looking for, as you say, putting money back in their pockets. I think the challenge, though, is going backwards as opposed to looking forward makes it very difficult for governments, other governments that, to try and manage. When you go backwards and you remove things, it becomes very difficult, as opposed to, we normally are sort of forward-looking on how we do things. And so all these proposals, for the most part, the ones that are the largest, that's what they do. They go backwards, as opposed to just going forwards, where we could adjust. I moved here, and I think many of us moved here. We weren't fortunate enough to be born here, because of the quality of life that we have and the opportunities that are afforded by living here in Palm Beach County in the state of Florida. And, and looking at some of the proposals, and I think some of them are reasonable. The proposal you're providing, really does help people moving. But, if we were to look at eliminating homesteaded properties, entirely in a place like Palm Beach County, the impact would be, I looked at our numbers, 90% of our revenues would be gone in how we provide services in this county. And that doesn't mean potentially we can't make up for it, maybe with additional fees. I don't know where these proposals, how they contemplate fees. I don't know. I mean, we are limited in our sales tax collections, but, is that off the table? Or can local governments can look at additional sales taxes to provide the level and the quality of services that we not only grown accustomed to, we demand, that we want living here. So I'm curious as to, what flexibilities will local governments have in the future?
If I can respond?
Sure.
Please.
So, yes, I think that there certainly are some, again, I'll say tough choices that may or may not happen depending on what the voters decide to do. We have 411 municipalities currently. We may not, after all this is done. There may be some contraction of towns and cities. That is a reality of what this may happen, what the voters decide to do. And I think that is something that needs to be talked about, is that it is possible that we may have some contraction of our municipalities. There may need to be some additional shared services agreements. Potentially, there's not a personnel department that's needed in every single municipality, and we can actually share those services across municipalities. There was a mention before of utilizing the sheriff's department instead of utilizing a boutique police department instead. This may be something that we would see more and more of if some of these go through. As far as the items that you may be able to raise some funding with, I would suggest the Department of Revenue has a book that is about 372 pages long, which I actually have gone through, and it's all the different ways that local government can assess and/or raise money for their pursuits. And there are certainly a multitude of ways that local government can choose to raise funding associated with that outside of homestead property taxes. My expertise today is dealing only with homestead property taxes and dealing in that specific issue. But I would suggest that your staff knows a lot about being able to go through that Department of Revenue book and find some additional ways to gain revenue.
Okay. Well, thank you, and again, I think we're all trying to grapple, with the costs. I did just, in following up with some other comments, I looked up, what the average cost of a new car was in 2020. It was about $38,000 or $39,000, and in 2025, it's $47,000 to $48,000. So about a 23 to 26% increase in vehicles, and so we're held to that as well. I mean, we have to replace vehicles, and in fact, that was, according to the sheriff, one of the drivers. His budget was the replacement of vehicles. They use vehicles, they don't last very long on the road for the road patrol folks, and so those are constantly being replaced. And I think, if I heard this correctly as well, that the sheriff's or law enforcement budget is being held harmless, but at the current level. Did I misunderstand that?
You have the decision to either keep the budget for law enforcement at a floor, and that floor would be the 25-26 funding level or 26-27 funding level. That would be your decision as to which floor you would choose to have that at.
Thank you. That's all my questions. And again, thank you for being here, and really appreciate you taking part in this with us.
Thank you. Next, I have Commissioner Powell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Representative Oberdorf, it is good to see you here. Thank you for joining us. And as a former member of the legislature, I know this is a process that I'm glad we're having the opportunity to have this conversation now, as it will continue to move. And what we're looking at today, I'm sure, won't be exactly what we'll be looking at toward the end of session, whenever that may be. Scheduled to be the early part of March, but as we witnessed last year, it could be June. So we don't know. Hey, they say the most dangerous time in Florida is when the legislature's in session. And they used to say those 60 days, and then last year the legislature broke a record, and now they say, as you just indicated, while the legislature's still in session. The challenge that I've had, even when I was a senator, is we talk about this idea of big government, right? We don't like big government. Especially if we get into party politics, we don't like big government. We don't like a bunch of government oversight. However, I've seen a shift over the last few years where government, I don't know if we still call it big government, when one government reaches into micromanage what another government does. But we've seen a consistent shift in that direction, and it hasn't just been with this invention of Doge or coming in and looking at. It's been the mandates. It's been a number of pieces of legislation that have chipped away at the ability of local governments to manage their own affairs. As Administrator Abruzzo indicated when he went into the legislature, the budgets were around $60 billion. This year, we're probably looking at somewhere around $120 billion for the state of Florida. Every year that I was in the legislature, the budget continued to increase for the state of Florida. Things have also skyrocketed. Of course, between 21 in '23, insurance costs in the state of Florida have increased by 102%. We still, as a state and as a county, have to pay insurance. The cost of road construction, the cost of labor, and we do know in elected office, we're what they call a public trust. And as a planner, the number one goal of a planner is to serve the public interest. And our residents and constituents trust that we will deliver goods and services. But when we go through the exercises, I want to make sure that people understand that some of these proposals, depending on what is passed, some of them we could not really look at a good cost benefits analysis, but some proposals, if passed, will result in some cuts. Sometimes, if we look at these cuts, I know people like to go to our parks and enjoy the parks. We had a major issue not too long ago where people were complaining that some of the parks would charge for parking. Well, if we cut some of these services, we're probably going to end up closing some parks on certain days. I see we talk about environmental resources management, clean air and water here in Palm Beach County. We like clean air and water, but when we start cutting, some of those things are going to, and those are the things that people don't really see, will take a hit. My garbage is picked up, I get 2 days, and one of those days they also pick up your recycling as well as your trash or your yard debris. You know, maybe people have to think, will we cut that back to 1 day? And then when you start thinking about, in none of the proposals that I've seen, will it limit local governments from increasing sales taxes. I know that when we met with the speaker, he indicated that sales tax is not something that's on the table, but reminding people that a sales tax is also a regressive tax that hits poor people a little bit harder than some of the other things. Keep in mind, local property tax caps annually 3% for homesteaded properties, and it's less if inflation is lower. 82% of the counties throughout the state of Florida, and this is what we found out last week at the Florida Association of Counties conference, 82% of our counties have either reduced rates or kept them the same since 2019. We know that we depend on storm services, emergency management. If storms happen, luckily in Palm Beach County we haven't had a big storm to hit us, but hazardous materials have to be removed rather quickly. And because we've got reserves and the state also has reserves, we're able to deal with that. But when we start looking at and shifting the funding, those are things that we have to deal with, and it becomes a little bit more difficult. 89% of countywide tax and bond proposals were approved in 2024. These are things that fund schools, clean water, emergency services, and more. So when individuals or when taxpayers are asked if they would pay more for clean water, funding of schools and emergency services, they have funded and pushed to pass bonds. So we, again, don't know what this will look like once the legislation is passed. But what I can tell you is, in order for an amendment to the Constitution or a joint resolution to go on the ballot, it has to pass in both the House and the Senate by a supermajority to get on the ballot. What I can tell you is, as we had a little bit of a discussion with regard to if these bills passed, partisan or bipartisan, both the House and the Senate are currently in a Republican supermajority, which means that no Democrat has to vote for this legislation to make it to the ballot in order for it to be on the ballot. Not saying that no Democrats will, because I see some of these proposals that are well-intentioned, that may be thought-provoking, and I would see an opportunity for some that may make it on the ballot, but we still don't know the cost-benefit analysis of what those particular pieces of legislation look like. But just keeping in mind, as we move forward, the potential that some services may be lost depending on what passes it becomes a challenge. So as you go back to Tallahassee, you're hearing directly from those of us here in Palm Beach County that although we know these proposals are well-intentioned, we really want you to keep in mind the services and the trust that our community is looking for from those of us who are put in these positions. We talked about salaries for our workers. We've increased salaries and we're still not up to par. These are challenges that we have to deal with on a daily basis that we can't expect the state, especially the entire state of Florida, to deal with all 67 counties or the 411 municipalities. Again, big government starts to micromanage small government, and it becomes problematic because our local government will be tasked with figuring out how to cut services. And believe me, if some things are cut to the levels that we're looking at, Rep. Oberdorf, there's going to be some cuts. There's going to be some pain. And I want to make sure that people at home understand that. I like to take my daughter to the library. There's tremendous services at Palm Beach County libraries, right? We need to keep those things in mind. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention to this matter, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to just explain some of the things that we've dealt with, we're looking at, and keep these in mind as you go back to Tallahassee to work with your colleagues on some thoughtful resolutions to the challenges that we face. Thank you.
Commissioner Powell, I still want to call you Senator, but we spent many a morning there together, and I appreciate it, and I miss you. But that being said, since you left, we actually lowered the state budget. And I'm not saying it's because of you, but we did lower the state budget this last year, and I would project that we will have a similar or lower state budget this year. I'm not sure on that, but this will depend on what the speaker and the president decide on. To your comment on insurance, yes, we've seen insurance have a major issue and a major issue across the state, but we just had a report from the Commissioner of Insurance, and in fact, we had 17 new companies come in. We had a 0.8% rise in the insurance rates overall, and I would suggest to anybody out there that look at your insurance per thousand rate, and if you don't like what you see, go shopping, because right now is a great time for you to go shopping and get a different rate on that. It's something that we have worked on very hard as insurance, and property insurance as well as car insurance. As far as the garbage pickup, I know that many municipalities, and I'm not exactly sure how you do it, you all are the experts on your own county, but garbage fee, I know that's what I pay in Martin County, and it's not associated with my homestead ad valorem. I do hear you on the potential for sales tax to go up. If in fact we would alleviate all property taxes, my suggestion would be that we'd see sales tax go up anywhere between 12 and 16%. And that is not sustainable for our retail environment. In fact, you'd probably see retail dry up in North Florida and everybody be shopping in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. So I don't see that as a reality either. But this is also why Rep. Griffith's bill, when dealing with the increases every year, is something that's really critical for our business partners out there. And I hope that the business partners are also paying attention to this discussion. If we eliminate all homestead property taxes, where does the burden lie? And that's on the non-homestead. Now, this is not only our businesses out there, this is also all of your rental properties. And therefore, when we talk about affordable homes, we're talking about the rental properties, we're talking about that starter property per se, all of these things out there that are critical to our residents, who I don't care where you are in the state of Florida. That's something we have to look at, and that's why Rep. Griffith's bill, when looking at, basically, you're only going to be able to increase it every 3 years, but could increase it as much as 15%. And that allows for businesses to plan what they're going to be paying in property taxes. And also on the home front side, we'd be increasing by 3%, but only over a 3-year time frame, once in 3 years. So again, allows for a homeowner to plan out what they're going to be doing. It doesn't eliminate the increase, but allows for planning. So I think those are some critical items, and yes, millage rates certainly have been held the same or reduced by most municipalities, but millage rates only tells a portion of the story, in that we see property values continue to go up and therefore collections continue to go up. And we haven't seen a rollback rate, which means going back to the previous year in all but, I think, 2 municipalities statewide in the last 5 years. And I may be wrong on that particular number because there's a lot of numbers there, but I believe it's about 2 that actually have done a full rollback. And you also have a challenge in the restricted versus non-restricted funding. And this is also going to be an area that potentially we're going to have to take a hard look at, and that is the utility side. Are we doing a large number of utility sweeps to make up for potential lost revenue? Is that utility sweep something that's allowed to be done and yet still have planning for the future for replacement pipes, for replacement items that may be coming forward? So these are all the macro, again, going back into the microeconomic side of all of this and why we've been so thought-provoking throughout this. And this is not an easy solution. And I am not saying it is by any means, but that's why I'm grateful to have these discussions with you all, be able to take some of this information back and to continue to have a thought-provoking. So Commissioner Powell, I sincerely appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Commissioner Sacks. Administrator.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Chairman, again, cannot thank you enough for being here and listening to us and looking at some of our numbers. One theme that I have seen from the point where Mr. Von Laren testified in front of your committee, as well as the board, is the reductions and how do we run it. But I think there's a glaring hole in another massive problem, which is beyond reductions, what we're looking at doing in the future, especially as far as technology. I think you also recognize that we're heading into an AI era and technology is expanding. One of the things that the board have been discussing, especially Commissioner Weiss before I assumed the position, is our traffic signalization to go to automation. And I have some numbers on that, which includes 30% reduction in travel time if we do this countywide, a 25% reduction when congestion occurs, 40% clearance time after accidents, and a 12% reduction in traffic crashes overall. What that equates to, we have an estimation that we have a $3 billion impact on our economy just for our traffic alone in Palm Beach County for lost time, fuel, and lost productivity for businesses at work. If we implement traffic signalization automation, we're going to save likely over $1 billion a year in economic impact. And I bring that up because if we go down this road, I don't understand how we ever get to actually improving on our government. And I think our residents would love to have those numbers in traffic go down, and then the economic impact. So as I plead to you, as you look at this, not only look at our pleas of how we run our government, but that the progress for the future can literally come to a screeching halt, especially as we're on the cusp of this brand new era. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Sacks. And then Commissioner Marino.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, sir, for being here. I think it's a great asset that you have 3 members of this county commission that served in the Florida House and the Senate. One thing I've learned about Florida government is this. The whole history of the state of Florida is local control, small government. Senator Powell brought it up brilliantly. We don't like in the state, and I'm talking North Florida and Central Florida, those folks up there don't like big government. They like local sheriffs and local control. They like to be able to control their work as they like it, whether it's hunting or fishing or permitting. And we down here in Southeast Florida, we've gotten used to it. What we don't like, Chair, is we don't like Tallahassee telling us how to run our businesses here and our families and our infrastructure. You see, I see our chief engineer in the back of this room. I know who he is. I know how to connect with him. But when it comes to taking our infrastructure to Tallahassee with the FDOT, I don't see any engineer here from the Florida Department of Transportation. They do good work. Well, we do pretty damn good work too in our infrastructure, sir. We like local control. We are used to it. The whole entire state of Florida, since our inception as a government, has been local control. In fact, even where the state capitol is located shows that it is up there in North Florida where they like local control. See, you can drive, what are we, 6 miles from Georgia in Tallahassee? I'd go up there to shop. Down here, Palm Beach County, where am I going to drive to get cheap gas or cheap fuel or cheap anything? Groceries. So to have Tallahassee, the state government, control what we do here, it just doesn't work. It may work in the state of California, but doesn't work in the state of Florida. We like our local control. And by taking away the fuel, which is property taxes, that funds our services, you're taking away our local control. Now, when that thing is on the ballot and somebody reads it and says, wow, I won't have to take property taxes anymore, where do I say yes? But do they know that they are losing their local control? I don't think so, because it's a package deal. Now, money's got to come from somewhere to run government. It doesn't, we can't get our folks to go to work every day because they want to or they like to. They got to make money to take care of their families. So that's going to come from Tallahassee. Heck, it's even hard to get a flight up to Tallahassee. You know that if you live down here, and I know that. We all know that. I know how long it takes to drive. Sometimes I have to fly to Atlanta to get to my own state capital. I won't go into the politics of that. What I'm saying is this. I know you're down here to promote this idea. Well, I think our biggest problem down here is too much Tallahassee control on our gun laws, on our security in this building for county commissioners, okay, and on many other things. But I think we do pretty damn well as we are here locally. We had the fellas come down to check how much money we were losing on things. What was that called? Yeah, Doge. I haven't heard back yet. I think we're doing pretty good. I think property taxes, I think that's not a big issue with folks. I think the biggest issue with folks is property insurance. Amen. So if we can work on what is the real problem in the house, that is property insurance, and that's controlled by Tallahassee. So you help us out with that. I remember when Charlie Crist was governor, we had a whole big deal on getting citizens insurance and taking care of our folks here on property insurance. So I'd like to see us focus on that. But I appreciate you going around. I wonder if the FAC has an opinion on taking away property taxes from counties. And I would like to see, when you talk about taking away our property taxes or eliminating most of them, talk to people about what services they're going to lose. Somebody's got to pay. Maybe we're going to have to raise maybe we'll have to get an income tax. My God. In the state of Florida. I didn't want to think about that. But somebody's got to pay for these services, Chair. So we're going to hear more from you as this goes through, I'm sure. And I'd like to see it also, the rest of the story, as they say. So when you remove property taxes, let's look at maybe instead lowering our sales tax, which runs state government. Let's look at lowering our sales tax and just making Tallahassee take care of state issues, but let the people here in Palm Beach County take care of our local issues. We've done it pretty damn well for many years. And we've got a new administrator that is awesome when it comes to being a CFO. We manage our money pretty well, but the most important thing is we manage the folks who work for us and we manage the people here in Palm Beach County. So I look forward. I want to thank you for your first visit. There's going to be more, because I want to hear more about the repercussions of what would occur if any one of these gets on the ballot, and how to explain to the people when they vote to get rid of their property taxes what's going to be the consequence of that. So thank you for your first visit. I look forward to a number more.
Thank you
Thank
for
you,
that,
Madam
Commissioner Sacks. And I would like to remind everyone, we're talking about the voters being able to vote on this, that Representative Overdorf here has not singularly decided to do this. So let's keep this in mind, please, when we're having these discussions. I appreciate you being here.
If I can
And
respond to Commissioner Sacks for a second.
Of course.
Thank you so much. Commissioner, I just want to make sure that the audience understands that the proposals that are currently put out by the Florida House are only for homestead property taxes. This is not for all property taxes. It's only for homestead and would not affect all property taxes. So just want to make sure that is brought there. There are provisions that look at all property taxes, but not an elimination of all property taxes. And I'm certainly here to, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor.
I'm sorry, Representative, it's something that hits, but I will wait until you finish.
Additionally, I just want to let you all know I'm certainly not here to promote. I'm just here to inform, and that is certainly what I'd like to be able to do. The DOGE efforts are done. There's two different ways it's being done. One is by the CFO from the state of Florida. The other is by the executive office, and we did allow for the executive office and the governor's office, that is, to go ahead and do that throughout the state. We're waiting for their report. It's supposed to be delivered to us by the first week of January. And they did do a presentation, but at this point, we don't know the results of the executive branch's review. And then we are, so you know, we are in the process of depopulating citizens insurance, which it reached a peak a little while ago, and now we're in the process of depopulating those that insurance side of it, which means that there's a lot more competition out there, and insurance rates are in fact going down. So we've heard the residents of the state of Florida in dealing with property insurance. So. And as far as us lowering the statewide sales tax, the House had a proposal last year to do exactly that, and both the Senate and the executive branch said no, you can't do that. Yet we wanted to bring it down by over 0.5%, and that wasn't allowed. So just wanted to throw those little tidbits out there. Thank you for your comments. Would be happy to come back, and I would suggest that we do it after session is over, whenever that may be, so I can then postulate on what's going to go forward and the voters decide. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Marino.
Thank you. I have some questions and some comments. One is, Palm Beach County is a donor county. You take away our tax revenue, we're not donating to the state or the other counties or the other cities. That will be one. The contraction of smaller cities and smaller counties, I'm all in favor of that. It would make everything a little bit more efficient and get rid of some redundancies. And if that could help offset us being a donor county, woo-hoo. Todd, question. Unfunded mandates over the years from the state, how much does that cost us?
So we project this year about $49 million in unfunded mandates that the state requires, and some of the larger ones are Article 5 with our state court system, some of the unfunded mandates in funding juvenile justice, some of our specific departments in different areas, and we actually provided a list to the committee, the select committee on that when we testified, and we can follow up with the chair and provide that again to them. I mean, a lot of those items are things that we might support, but again, when we talk about revenues and those kinds of things, and that doesn't even include our CRAs, which we're required to fund at $83 million a year right out of the gate, you know, based on state law too. So you start adding a lot of those numbers together, it's pretty significant.
So if we lower our exemptions, or I should say, we lessen the amount of money that we take in as tax dollars, those unfunded mandates still have to get paid, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You're hearing what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Insurance. We've talked a lot about insurance. My property taxes have gone up marginally in the 7 years that I've owned the current home that I'm in. My property taxes have more than doubled. I think we should be spending a lot more time on insurance than we should be on taxes. And no one's really going after that in a big way. Going after taxes, property taxes in a big way, but as a comparison, as a percentage of increase, I am paying double in insurance on my house than I am in taxes. That wasn't the case when I moved in 7 years ago. So we need to spend a lot more time on insurance and not so much time on taxes. But again, we are a donor county. If you take away our tax dollars, we're not helping the rest of the state. And as a percentage, what has the law enforcement budget gone up as opposed to our general fund budget over the past 5 years? I would say the law enforcement budget has gone up more as a percentage than our general fund budget, correct?
Madam Mayor, just to focus on this past fiscal year, the sheriff's budget was increased approximately 13% as compared to our general BCC departments, which was roughly 2.6% increase from FY25 to FY26.
So when we're hearing these comparisons about how our budget overall has gone up, what's not being said is that our public safety, our police, and our fire is the greatest amount of that increase, not our general fund. I mean, not our general operations, our BCC operations.
That's correct.
Okay. And if we were to
Yes.
do an across the board, like has been asked, 5, 10, 15, and 20%, you know, some of our departments that are relied on by our constituents, our Parks and Rec, our Palm Tran, Engineering and Public Works, those are the biggest portion of our budget. They would take the biggest hit. And those are the most amount of employees that we have. And when you think about this, this is going to hit our employees more than anything else. And if we can't offer services to folks, why are they going to come to Palm Beach County? They're not. So I think, Chair, what you're hearing from this board is that while getting rid of property taxes on homesteaded properties, you're going to put a huge burden on those that are investing in our county. They're not going to come and invest in our county anymore. For those that are in an apartment, and we've already seen rents go up randomly throughout the year during a lease agreement, we're going to have folks losing their homes, losing the roof over their head. The homeless that we have in our county, and no one likes to really talk about it, that number will increase even more than it is now. So while this sounds like a great idea, let's get rid of property taxes on homesteaded properties, you are putting the burden on so many more people, and it is going to affect the services that we provide. It's going to affect the homeless that we have in our community, and not to mention the community service is a big part of what we do. Mental health, I mean, you name it, we cover it here. So I implore all of you to understand that the largest increase in our budget has not been in the services that we provide from our BCC. It has been in our public safety, our police, and our fire. We have unfunded mandates of, Todd, you said $40 million?
$49 million.
$49 million just this year, correct?
Correct.
Then you have FDOT telling us with Tri-Rail that we need to come up with an additional $10 million a year when Tri-Rail actually takes a lane mile off the road each way. I don't know where we're going to be able to move those cars. I don't know where those folks are going to be able to, I don't even want to go there. Never mind. I think you can hear our pleas that, okay, yes, maybe we make the homestead exemption a little bit more. But getting rid of property taxes on homes that are homesteaded is, I'll just put it out there, ridiculous. And while I am a proponent of lower budgets and smaller government, I'm also a proponent of being able to provide the services to our constituents that they have here in our county that makes them safer. And I just hope that when we talk about putting something on a ballot, there is an opportunity to educate those that will be voting on just what they will lose on something that sounds so well-intentioned, ends up being very hurtful. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Woodward?
Madam Mayor, if I could just do a quick response.
Only for time, we are going to have a hard stop today at 12:20.
2 seconds. I would just say that on your property insurance, please look at your rebuild cost. And then again, look at the rate per thousand on that. I'm just going to say that one last time. And your health district here is amazing. They did come and they met with me most recently about the hospital out at the lake. So yes, ma'am, I apologize. Go right ahead.
And honestly, I was going to kind of speak for you. You've said it a couple times, and I thank you for that, that you at the state level have brought in 17 different companies, and you have been working diligently to lower our insurance. I just think we and the residents have not seen it quite yet, so it's hard to wrap our brains around what that ultimately is going to look like. So thank you, and it hasn't gone unheard. I'm going to let Vice Mayor Woodward finish up with her questions, and then I will go last.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to thank you, Chair Oberdorf, for what you brought forward, because we've been discussing all of the property taxes, and your bill that you've put forward with the Save Our Homes benefit, with the portability, and also the Senate bill that is the one having properties assessed under $500,000 before change of ownership. Those types of changes, I think, are really beneficial for what we've been discussing as far as real changes that matter. And when I met you a few months ago, I brought up a number of reassessments, and having discussions with our own property appraiser, there's a number of reassessments that get triggered automatically through state statute for a number of reasons that really don't make sense. I mean, I had 3 different residences I talked to you about when I met with you. One, a couple who lived in their home for a number of years decided to do a trust, and I guess maybe didn't fully understand that when they added their son's name to their trust, it triggered a reassessment. They didn't move out of their home, and they were in a waterfront property for about 15, 20 years, and their taxes doubled because of a reassessment. And, you know, we had someone who, the woman, her mother had passed away, and she had a beachfront condo that she lived in since the 80s, left it to her daughter, who was like, I'm going to move into there. I'm now in my 60s. Well, she couldn't afford the taxes because of the reassessment that happened. So there's a number of ways that you can help. And with having this one not to exceed 150%, we, as the county, are currently trying to help younger families enter into home ownership. And having them buy a home from someone who bought their house in 1972, like my next door neighbors who just moved out, and a young couple bought their house. Well, the tax bill that the couple that was living next door to me was paying, I'm sure it was a fraction of what, you know, our new neighbors just got reassessed for. So these types of reassessments that trigger, and we are getting larger values from these, you know, just because the millage is what it is, but these reassessments that triggered, it's very effective for people who are living here and people who want to own homes here. So these are homestead reassessments that you have the opportunity to fix, and your bill already addresses some of this. There's a number of these. So I think if the conversation that you're putting forward, you guys can make a lot of these changes to help our residents, and then put some of this home or the exemptions in here. I think that gives all of us something that we really can work with. And because the hard question we have to ask ourselves, and we have to ask our residents, are, you know, what are you willing to pay for? You live collectively in a neighborhood. What are you willing to pay for along with your neighbors? And those are the things that we have to answer for when we're planning our budgets. Public safety is always a big one. You know, law enforcement's off the table on this, but there's a number of things that we do have to consider. So I think the exercise, it's painful. You hear a lot of passion on this board on how we pay for these things, but it's a good exercise that we should be going through, because these budgets are very large. And, you know, we have a number of municipalities, and you mentioned contraction. We have some very affluent municipalities in our county that have no commercial. There's a number I have 13 cities in my district, coastal barrier islands, that have not a single commercial property. Almost everything is homestead. So they would, I'm guessing, cease to exist at that point. But then my question is, are we then responsible for taking over? It kind of triggers some other questions. And these are not areas where it's, you know, low income, shall we say. It's very expensive areas that are functioning fully on their own right now. So again, questions for you to consider. I don't envy your job either. I don't envy our job with whatever comes after this, shall we see. But I'm very much for, you know, tax cuts. I don't like tax redistribution. So if it ends up becoming a higher sales tax, I think that's something everyone's very concerned with. So however this shakes out, I think your bill is something that is definitely workable. And looking at it, like, it looks like you took a deep dive into understanding how this stuff works and trying to give us ways that we can provide some relief. So I applaud you for that. I hope that you get a lot of following in that direction in the House, and whatever, I could do to help support this, I'm happy to. Because I said, as long as we're not looking to just redistribute how we're taking the money, I mean, that's not really a tax cut at that point. So with that, thank you very much, and thanks for coming here today. It wasn't easy, I'm sure, to sit through some of this, but it's not easy for us to digest either from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Let me start with saying I want to reiterate how appreciative I am that you are here taking these questions, Chair, and understanding that this isn't all you. This is a state-driven initiative to get this on the ballot, and that I understand, I think some of the driving force, we probably align on a lot more things than you realize. I do believe there is waste in government spending. I always have. I found it here. The problem with saying that is that when you have 7 different opinions, everyone has a different idea of what's wasteful. So we have to realize that, and that's why we have a local control and why we have different, in Palm Beach County, we have 7 different districts because we have 7 different areas of very, let's say, high need and different things are going to be important to different people. And so I personally believe in less government, less taxes, but I also understand that we have a very unique county. I also represent Belle Glade, Pahokee, South Bay, and then I represent Wellington, Loxahatchee, and the Acreage. There are 3 very different areas all within my district. And so we have this unique ability here to take care of the most amount of residents. And I have been fighting to reprioritize a lot of things because I believe infrastructure, capital improvement projects, which thanks to our new administrator, have been heavily underway to get done. The state changed some laws, and so our infrastructure is years behind currently. Unfortunately, when they left it up to us to pay for, it costs us 3 times as much and takes 3 times as long, I feel, than what the private sector can do the same road projects for. The same infrastructure projects, the same everything. And this is a problem. So when we start looking at where we cut, what reductions take place, let's say this is put on a ballot and it comes before us. Now we, as 7, are still going to be dividing up how to spend the money that's left. So I just want you to realize that when we're looking at this, I don't think this is just up to you, but that's going to be a reality coming to this board if there is a vote that takes place and they all vote to reduce, that where would you suggest we start first? Because I bet you would probably align on that, but not everyone is going to have the same idea on what is the most important. And as to Commissioner Marino's point, we do have a vast array of services we provide residents, and we also have a great amount of people that have different needs. Where I prioritize one thing, somebody prioritizes something else, they don't always align. There was several things that I would like to go back to for a second. We have on several pages here, to Commissioner Woodward's point, of some of these are good, I think, potential bills, but they seem to all say TBD on the ones that I think are really a great plan. So I'd like to get some ideas of what those numbers could actually be. So do we have a timeline on when we could get those numbers?
We have been working with the property appraiser's office on some of those others, particularly Senator Bernard's legislation. And I think that as those pieces of legislation move to hearings in the Senate, they'll be scored by the state as well in the revenue estimating conference. And so we'll be able to get some numbers, hopefully, if those start moving and those conversations happen in committees through those analyses. We're still working on it. I mean, I think we're probably a couple of weeks or so away from continuing to get you some numbers on that. But again, there's a lot of moving pieces of some of those that are different than some of the House bills we saw, which were really specific to maybe one area, and those have a different caveats. But we'll continue to dig in there and get those to you, Mayor.
I appreciate that, and timeliness, please, is an important factor in this. We also, something that was mentioned were special taxing districts. Now, I live in one of these special taxing districts that is not limited by a homestead exemption and increased their budget by over 20% in 1 year. So if you're really looking at something, I think we shouldn't be excluding them from this as well, because then ultimately that burden is still there. Those special taxing districts have no limits on what they can increase, so I would ask that the state takes a look at that as well. We also have, at the county, when we reduce the amount of money going out, we, to the administrator's point, we do have a workforce. We have over 700 open positions in the county that we can't fill, that have been open for a while. And we have a hard time. We get people in, we train them, they go through the process, and then they leave. And so we're having a hard time. Yet, on the other hand, we also have mandates from the state that says we have now timelines for turning around permits and timelines for doing certain things, but we need to be able to pay good people to do that. So, and nobody expects to work for free, especially in Palm Beach County. The cost of housing has increased exponentially. So you might look at reducing, some dollars per resident, reducing there, or per household, reducing the homestead ad valorem, but at what cost are we then slowing the economic growth of being able to process certain things? And then I go back to, yes, I understand there's waste probably in some of our opinions, but not everyone is going to agree what that waste is. I'm going to speak a little bit from a personal note here. My husband and I own a small business and own a building. So that is a non-homesteaded property. I will tell you, if one of these first ones pass, you will put us out of business. The amount of money we have to spend every year in property tax for our building, we're at our max now with the cost of everything going up. So then if we vote to eliminate the rest and that tax burden falls on small businesses, that's going to hurt our economy as well. We will have to sell our building that doesn't have a homestead exemption. That is a thought that the state really should consider, which is why I absolutely love Senator Bernard and his bill, because, people think commercial, they think, oh, people with commercial have all this money. That's not the case. A lot of small businesses like ours, there are minimal profit margins. There are minimal, you work every year, you budget, you do. It's hard to budget when you don't know what they're going to be. Some of these I did like. It helps on a personal level, but I also don't want to see parks and all the other things that our residents have come to love. I kind of compare it to like this. I don't like using the word never, so I'm going to say this sparingly, but I will never make the choice to actively live in an HOA if there's any other option. But I tell you, I also understand the need for people who want to live in an HOA. They're beautiful. They're well maintained. They're manicured. They're the prettiest places in most instances, with the best pools and tennis courts, pickleball courts as well. But those are options that our residents make. And I believe the same is with Palm Beach County. When you decide to move to Palm Beach County, now I was born here, and my mother was born here. I've seen a lot of change. I've heard about a lot of change. So I just ask that you take it into account that people can choose, if they don't like our taxes currently, to move to another county that might offer less services and less. I'm about options. I don't like trying to mold people into a certain path. I do understand that I think options are the best way to go, and I think leaving local government and residents those options seems to me like the most free choice. So I will kind of say that there. Now, with all that being said, Administrator, I do have what I would like to be a directive without objection. I would like us to have the most informed residents in the state. Palm Beach County, and I've heard several commissioners state it, and I just want to make that, I want us to be ready to go as soon as we have exactly what is going to be on the ballot, like ready, lined up, waiting to send out as much information and as much to every resident on what they're voting on and how it will impact them. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're going to, at our next board meeting, I'll ask staff, because believe it or not, the legislature passed a law and rules of how we can advocate to the public. So they tied our hands in many respects in the way that we can advocate
So we're
to
not
them.
allowed to explain ballot language?
Mr. Van Laren?
So the way that the legislation reads is that we are not able to send out anything regarding an item that foreseeably could be on a ballot. So it originally was we couldn't advocate, then it got even tighter to that we can't send things out to do that or spend money on those things.
Well-
So we've tried to work a different few angles on that to be able to do it, and we'll continue to work with the county attorney's office on that, but there's opinions about what we can and can't do, and it's very limited about what we can do in that regard. But you can do, as commissioners, a lot more than we as staff can do, because there are stipulations that are different sometimes between what commissioners and staff and others, so we'll get you that
Madam Mayor,
detailed.
on a board vote, we may be able to appropriate more money to your district offices, so you can advocate out. Is that a potential, or is that out of it as well?
We'll get with the county attorney's office on that.
Yes, get with the county's attorney's office, because I think if residents are at risk of losing certain services and they're at risk of losing certain things based on a vote, we do need to know how legally
Yes.
we can get this information to them sooner than later.
Yes.
Madam Mayor, can I just?
Please.
Yeah, I mean, generally, you can provide information on the website. You can host public forums with information, things of that nature. We can't mail anything out.
So it's limited to mailers. We can't mail things out?
Well, in general, you cannot advocate. The county cannot advocate as a body.
What is the
so-
legal definition of advocate or versus informing?
I can check the statute and see if it's in the statute.
Can we get a
clarity?
clarification on that? Because it's not advocacy informing our residents. I think that is part of our job to keep them informed.
Yeah, I believe, information that says this is the impact of this bill is informational, is not advocating.
Thank you. That is what I'm asking. And now, is that limited?
Just as to what I said, we cannot do mailers or things of that nature,
We
but
can't inform them via mailers?
you cannot.
How is that different? And I'm curious now. How is that different than when we inform residents that some zoning is going to change? We're not advocating one way or the other.
It's not state, yeah, it's just specific to
Not on the ballot. Gotcha. Okay.
items that specifically can be on ballot.
We do need those parameters so that we as commissioners.
But
Vice
Chair
Mayor.
Overdorf can advocate for changing that law this session in Tallahassee, and that's why we appreciate him being here to hear how our hands are tied on that.
I only have 7 bill slots.
I'll give you an amendment.
He's saying we need to find a senator. All right, no, I do think we need to keep our residents well-informed. I do have 2 lights on, if we could. Commissioner Sacks and then Commissioner Weiss.
I think what you said is excellent and to the point, and I would follow that up, Mayor. You could ask our county attorney to give us parameters legally so that we don't get in trouble with the
Correct.
state. And I'm sure the chair would follow up with that as well. But I think we need to get some legal parameters is what we can and cannot do.
Yes, please.
Following
Yeah,
what
we
you're
will-
saying,
We will
Madam Mayor.
provide that information.
To my point, Madam Mayor, at our next meeting, I'll have a full description of what we can and cannot do.
I appreciate that, thank you. Commissioner Weiss?
Yeah, while we were sitting here, I did a quick look up on rents in Palm Beach County, and our rent index from 2020 was $1,700 a month. Currently in 2025, it's $2,500 to $2,700 a month, so that's a 50 to 60% increase in the rent index in Palm Beach County, 5 years.
Commissioner Marino, and then Representative Overdorf, or Chair, excuse me.
Thank you. I just want to say, Rep. Overdorf, thank you for being here today. We much appreciate it. And if I had to pick any of these, yours seems to be the least hurtful, so I would go ahead and support that one.
Thank you, Commissioner Marino. And first of all, I was remiss in one of my duties. Mr. Van Laren did a very good job in front of our committee. He represented the county very well, so kudos to you, and thank you for representing a large county in the manner that you did. Sincerely appreciated you taking the time to be up there. Your presentation was very good, so I wanted to say that in front of your bosses. Make sure you got that. I also want to remind the commissioners that while we have these 7 proposals, this may not be also everything that's included. We talked earlier about and had very specific conversations with Vice Mayor and others about what we refer to as the death tax, and that meaning the transfer of generation. There may be an opportunity to expand upon some of our proposals that allow for that. We also haven't talked about disability and military disability. And right now, if you are 100% disabled, you pay no property taxes. If you're 95% disabled, you pay 100% of your property taxes. So we are looking at ways to recognize disability as well. There's also, we talked earlier about buying a property that somebody has had for a gazillion years and they pay almost no property taxes. New person comes in and they haven't done their research. All of a sudden, they're hit with a real surprise because their property taxes are up here. We're looking at working with the realtors on a new disclosure that would allow for at least truth in lending per se and allow for that to happen. So, and then I do have, believe it or not, a small districts bill, a special districts bill, so maybe that might expand and looking at some different ways to rein in the spending of special districts as well. Ladies and gentlemen, this is incredibly complex, and as you are very aware of that, I have a feeling that Administrator Abruzzo and I will be talking a lot as we move forward. I'll make sure he has my cell phone so that we can do that, and certainly look forward to coming back here at the time that these are passed. And I have every confidence, Mayor, you're going to be well prepared for whatever it is that ends up in the ballot. Thank you all to having me here today, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you. Do I have any comments from the board? Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Meeting adjourned.